annual jointly meeting, so we really appreciate you being able to make it, and we're very happy there wasn't the typical blizzard which usually accompanies this meeting. So we will start. Just for the base board members, when you do talk, please turn on your mic, and you got to kind of talk into it. If you're talking, if like I'm talking to you and I go like this, they can't hear it out in TV land, so you got to kind of talk into the mic. So we will start with the call to order and the Pledge of Allegiance, and the flag is right back there. And per usual, we'll go back and forth because we have two governing bodies here. We need approval from different bodies for different things. So we'll start with the sorry about that. We'll start with the approval of the agenda for the city school board. Do I have a motion and a second? Motion by Chris. Do we have a second by Jeff? Any questions or comments about the agenda? Seeing none, assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Now we'll move on to the base.
May I please have a motion and a second for the approval of our agenda? Motion by Nicole, second by Brandon. Any corrections or comments? Hearing none, roll call vote. All those say aye in favor, please.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Okay. The agenda for tonight has been approved.
Thank you. Let's move on to item 3, which is celebrating success. Mr. Berge.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Angie, could I have you come up here, please? Usually you're stuck listening to me about the boring financial statements, so tonight it's going to be kind of, we'll make it kind of fun here, and I'm very proud to work with Angie Ament, and happy to be here to say a few words about here our classified employee of the first quarter. Angie is our payroll supervisor and works hard week in and week out on payroll and employee benefits for all 1,500 to 1,600, sometimes more checks over the course of a month. And very integral part of our school district. As I guess I didn't probably tabulate, but Angie, probably $90 to $95 million goes through your hands in the form of paychecks and benefits over the course of a year. So you can't put a value on. Well, you can put a value on you, Angie. Almost $100 million. It goes
through the other way too, though.
Yeah. And payroll checks are, again, issued in the majority of the weeks during the year. Payroll is not something that can be extended like a tax return or put off in emergency situations or put on the back burner. It's mission critical to our operations on a weekly basis. And certainly many complexities with payroll, various taxes and benefit components and so on and so forth. So it goes without saying that being precise is also very important, and Angie is very diligent. Angie has been in the office on many storm days. 2 years ago, I think we had 7 storm days. I was here on most of them, and I think, Angie, you were probably here on all of them, and sometimes the snowbanks probably were higher getting into the door than you are at all. So your dedication shows through in many ways. This week is a holiday, and while certainly we're all thankful for Thanksgiving, we do have payroll this week, and it does shorten up the time frame in order to get the payroll done and electronically posted for payment on Friday. So Angie's here currently working, and probably will be throughout our board meeting working on payroll for this Friday. And again, we're very appreciative of that. Angie's also been very instrumental with our employee benefits, working to automate the open enrollment processes and the online aspects of how we can work through open enrollment, and that's been a big time saver and a big help. Angie receives a lot of emails and phone calls regarding payroll and benefits, and she's always responding with a smile and always make sure that person's question is answered. Angie is also one of our most positive and upbeat employees in the district. If Marilyn Hagerly was still publishing her column, Angie would be in the running every single week for Cheerful Person of the Week. She's just a pleasure to have around here. And we're all lucky to have Angie in our district, and she's definitely most deserving of our Classified Employee of the Quarter. And I wish you all, and congratulating me for Angie for all she does for our school district.
Congratulations, thank you. Well, it's kind of dangerous putting me at the beginning of a board meeting, because anybody that knows me knows I like to talk, but I don't like to talk about myself, so that's going to work out okay. So I don't feel deserving of this, because there's a million wonderful people around this district, including this building. There's a lot of amazing, but especially my business office and human resource team. We all work together to make everything happen, so I don't do any of this in silo. Without all of those people, I wouldn't be able to do any of it. So, but that is what my team, the colleagues, everybody around the district is what makes me love what I do. So thank you all very much, but I accept it on behalf of a lot of other people. So thank you.
Angie, congratulations. Or did she leave already and start working? She left already. Well, payroll's Friday. Everybody's going to be spending Christmas money, so appreciate that. Let's go on to approval of the minutes for the City Board, item 4A, the October 25th minutes, which are corrected minutes. Do I have a motion and a second for those minutes? Motion by Doug. Do we have a second? Second by Bill. Any corrections or additions? Assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. And then item 4B, which is the November 8th minutes. Do I have a motion and a second for those? We have a motion by Chris, second by Cynthia. Any questions, comments about those minutes? Seeing none, assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Go ahead, Michelle.
We'll now continue with the minutes from October 19th from the base board meeting. May I please have a motion and a second? A motion by Brent, second by Brandon. Any questions or comments? Having none, assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Thank you. Minutes approved.
Let's move on to item 5, which is public comments for both the city board and the base board. I don't have any cards, and I don't think we have anybody online, so we can move on. Let's move on to item 6, which is superintendent's recommendations for discussions. Review of the school board meeting norms. Amber.
Be prepared, be on time, value and respect each other, exercise thoughtful deliberation and conversation, be professional at the board table when visiting with the general public, speak up when the norms are not being followed, advocate on behalf of students, and keep the community in mind.
Thank you. Let's move on to item 6B, which is a state of the base with Colonel Timothy Curry, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Brenner.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's my privilege to welcome Colonel Timothy Curry, commander of the 319 Reconnaissance Wing from the Grand Forks Air Force Base. There are two things in life that make me nervous. One is when I was an athlete playing basketball against my father, who was coaching a different team, and the other is introducing really, really important people. So, Colonel Curry, we're so happy that you are here this evening. Just a little background of Colonel Curry. He received his commission from the United States Air Force Academy in 1999. He has served in various positions on the Air Force Headquarters and Central Command staff, most recently as Executive Assistant to the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. Colonel Curry commanded a dual mission MQ-1B and MQ-9 squadron. He has over 2,300 flight hours in various aircraft, including the F-16, MQ-1B, MQ-9, RQ-170, and RQ-4. Colonel Curry has global combat experience in each major weapon system. He has a Bachelor of Science degree in Social Sciences in 1999. He has a Master of Arts from Alabama in 2008. He has a Master of Science of Strategic Intelligence in 2012. And he has a Master of Philosophy of Military Strategy in 2014. I think there was one other one in here. Your Master of Arts is in Religion and Pastoral Counseling as well, just to add that detail. So I would like all of you to please help me welcome Colonel Tim Curry.
Okay, let's see if I can, hey, I got it on. And we have video too. We're winning. Awesome. So I had to throw these glasses on. I made this this print. It's got to be like 20 font, you know, like it's old people standard. So you probably could read it from there. He's got good eyes, but for me, I just got a little nervous, so I put my glasses on. So at the State of the Base, I delivered that one primarily with the Military Affairs Committee, Greater Grand Forks community. And what I learned that day was it was their 13th State of the Base. And I told the team, Dr. Brenner was there, told everybody, I said, as Providence would have it, I met my wife 13 years ago in the Alaris at the El Bistro. So they probably were having the State of the Base at a similar time, which was pretty cool. It was kind of neat to kind of put that together. And then I got to hear tonight a little bit about how this has worked out in the past, and generally you're on the base and you're working your way through this blizzard. So no blizzards tonight, so that's a good thing. 13 years later, I never would have imagined I'd be the wing commander here at Grand Forks Air Force Base. Married to my best friend, Jenny. She's from Buxton, in case you guys didn't know that. So that's the better half right there. We have 4 kids. 3 of them attend school right here in Grand Forks. 1 is over in East Grand Forks in the mornings doing his preschool stuff. So I'm a very fortunate man, very excited to spend about 10 minutes just sharing a little bit of my thoughts about the importance of investing in our nation's most valuable treasure, our kids, our children. So I have 2 simple objectives this afternoon. Number 1, to help you guys consider what it means to invest into our military families. And you do that every day, so I'm just dreaming with you. And then number 2, really to say thank you. Thank you to all of you, to the school district, to the staff, to the faculty, to everybody that supports your mission overall, to include. She just ran out the door, but I think people like to get paid, so that's a good thing that we're recognizing her from that standpoint. So 2 objectives from that standpoint, and really to say thank you on behalf of my family. As a father who's got 4 kids in Grand Forks and East Grand Forks going through school. So thank you. And then on behalf of my wing and the military families, again, thank you from them as well for the critical role that you provide to our nation. I'm fortunate to care for 4,500 airmen and families, 4,500. There's 2,000 of them on Grand Forks Air Force Base, another 800 active duty airmen in California, Guam, Italy, and soon to be Georgia. This community has global impact when you think about the education you provide. To break those numbers down into specifics for the kids that you serve daily, 371 total students of active duty personnel attending public schools off base or being homeschooled. 299 of those students attend Twining on the base, and then 238 of those students attend other public schools off base in Grand Forks School District. Additionally, we have 10 military personnel currently attending colleges off base, affiliated in this area. So what I'd like to do is walk you through a day in the life of a military family that just moved to Grand Forks Air Force Base in the last year or maybe 2, because I've been here for just over 2 years. And I think my family dynamic is pretty similar to what you've seen or experienced or what you'd hear from many families here in Grand Forks Air Force Base, just based off the demographics of my family. So before I go into some of the details of that, I did put this picture up here in this slide. People often hear about the mission, and I'm not going to talk about that for too long, but I want you to think about the families and the kids that you serve. The left is my left, maybe you're right up there. That's from our medical group, and so we have medical professionals that provide support to active duty, but they provide it to dependents as well in some instances. And most people think doctors and nurses and dental, but you have all the techs and all the support that is associated with that as well. In the middle, we have our operations group, and that's what most people think of when they think of the base. They think of planes and pilots and aircrew and maintainers, and that's a portion of the mission as well. And then finally, on the right-hand side, that's our civil engineers. But we have a lot more in our mission support group, to include our cops, our defenders, communications personnel, the people that ensure we get our pay, comptroller from that standpoint, and many other airmen. So between the medical group, the operations group, and the mission support group, those are all the people that service the airmen on our base. You guys have similar people out here just outside as well, going through all those things, and so we get the opportunity to partner with you from that perspective. So I wanted to highlight that in the first slide. The second slide here, let's see if I get this right. Let's go this way. Hey, victory. This is what we're spending our time on, talking about investing in our future. So I just picked three pictures and asked my team to put that up there. Generally, people like that, and two would keep me from talking too long. The picture up on the far left, that's a picture of Twining and some of the students out front there. The picture in the middle is my family, my 4 kiddos and my bride, and I'll come back to that. And the picture on the right, actually, most people here now, part of our mission is drones, right? It's UAVs, RPA, remotely piloted aircraft. Another part has to do with high-frequency global communications, and that has to do with, honestly, nuclear command and control. We do both of those missions on the base, and so I'm not going to go into a bunch of detail. But to say, when my family got the assignment, which we volunteered to come here because my wife's from North Dakota, and I was definitely trying to win back some points here with my spouse after 2 years in D.C. It was a lot of work. So I said, hey, babe, I want to volunteer to go back there. She goes, that'd be a good idea. So we get our orders to come back to Grand Forks. Well, I already owned a home here. I don't know if you guys knew that. So I'm a lieutenant colonel. I've been selected for colonel, and most colonels on the base live on the base. In fact, pretty much all colonels live on the base. So I had to get permission to live in my own home. But before I got permission to live in my home, my kids were expecting to go to Twining. So we prepared our kids, showed them video, talked through the process of what this would be like to go through and to be admitted into this school. Lo and behold, I show up. In the first couple of weeks, we work through, hey, you're going to get to actually live in your home. So guess what, kids? Surprise. You're going to actually go to a different school. So now we show them Discovery. They get the opportunity to see what that was like and to prepare to meet those faculty and staff and principals, which was honestly for us a pretty fantastic experience. But a little bit different in that we thought we were going to one place, but then we went to another. That's not abnormal. We have families that start out on the base and they move off the base. We have families that start off the base and they move on the base, and so they generally have to switch schools with that, and then there's some that you grant permission and they work through that process to stay right where they are. So I just want to highlight that piece with respect to Twining. On the far right side there, I do love the picture of the little guys there controlling those drones. We do some pretty cool stuff, and we do it in conjunction with the public schools and the university itself overall. The STEM programs that you guys espouse to and the way that you push our kids is fantastic. It also aligns with our department. You guys saw maybe your grades that you got from the Department of the Air Force, which were pretty fantastic, but they can improve, just like you generally push your students, right, from that standpoint. But we value education within the Air Force, and we look for that as far as where our installations are actually housed and where they will be in the future. So I just wanted to highlight that piece. This is something that is a little bit unique in that we're getting the opportunity to fly those drones here on our base. We're actually going to work our way outside of buildings and do them outside here eventually. Probably not during the winter, but going forward. That is unique to Grand Forks because we're pushing the envelope with respect to drone technology compared to some other bases. And then finally, going back to the vignette of where I'm going to spend most of my time talking through experiences is with my family. So Jenny's from here. Like I said, grew up in Buxton, went to Central Valley for her schooling. So she spent all of her time growing up pretty much in the same school. That is not my oldest daughter, Trinity's experience. She's 11 years old. Trinity has gone to the same school for 2 years in a row, only once in her life. That's here in Grand Forks. She went to Discovery for 2 years. Prior to that, she went to 2 different preschools, 2 different kindergartens, different first grade, different second grade, and then she got to different fourth grade, and then to here. So think about that experience when you're 11 years old. But she's not abnormal when it comes to military families. We move often. Sometimes we move within a particular move. And so I think that you should consider that as you think about partnering with us in the future and the challenges and opportunities that I'll talk to you in here in just a second. Then you got Tommy, who's my 9-year-old, and I was talking to somebody earlier about the fact that we came here, and He didn't even know how to skate. He didn't know how to ice skate at all. Now he's playing hockey, and he never wants to leave. You know, he's into hockey. From that standpoint, but again, Tommy, up until being here, had never gone to the school, same school 2 years in a row. And then you got Tegan, who started over in East Grand Forks, because you guys know that early childhood education preschool is a little bit of a challenge in trying to figure out where people will be. So she started over there, and now she's moved to Discovery, and very excited from that standpoint. And then Titus is my youngest, 5 years old, and he's still over on East Grand Forks. So what are some of the challenges and opportunities that we faced? My family, and I think other families would say, and Lexi's looking at me to make sure that I highlight these things from a slow perspective. Some things to consider now and into the future. Virtual homeschool opportunities. We're partnering with you guys from that standpoint to see how we can do that better in the future. None of us predicted a pandemic. Well, maybe there are some people, but it wasn't me. Okay, so we're working through that together to see how we should do that better in the future. Distance education opportunities. There's greater opportunity in that, as well as to how we actually do that and how it's recognized from a legal standpoint and also from a policy standpoint. Preschool options, we talked about that piece with respect to Tegan as my preschooler before, and now Titus. And then finally, communication. This is probably one of the bigger things that you guys all experience that we do on the base too. I literally have yet to receive an email as a wing commander that says, "Sir, you're doing fantastic with your communication." I just haven't got that email yet. You guys may feel the same pain with respect to parents, not only on the base, but our parents that live within the community, of how can we do a better job of communicating. What I generally find is there's a temporal piece to that. Most people want information right now. That's just not how it works. So we can partner with you, sharing that information with our airmen and their families when you have a plan, or even as you're vetting that plan, and that's why Lexi and the team is here from that standpoint. All that being said, at the end of the day, the biggest win, I think, for the community, and honestly for us, is the Purple Star Community Award that you guys were given here. That's a big deal. It's a really big deal. And for those of you that may not be familiar with that, this is how we actually classify it. A major commitment to serving students and families connected to our nation's armed forces. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but we're really proud of it. Makes us feel like we're part of the community for sure, and that you care, and that you're invested into us. That's what the slide says. Not only now, but for the long haul. All right, about 60 more seconds. So in 22 years of service, I've actually never been part of a community that's received that award. Granted, it hasn't been around that long, but I haven't been a part of a community like this community. We have board members embedded and integrated, and they're just part of your community. They live on the base, they live off the base, they live outside of this school district. They make their way back to this school district. One, either with their kids, or two, to actually serve in some capacity with you overall. I think that's pretty fantastic. Additionally, we talked about some of the laws and guidance overall and changes that you guys have made. So you're familiar with the HB 1107, that in-state tuition ability. That's not necessarily for you, but when you think about military members and dependents, it's a big deal to get in-state tuition. So that's a benefit to our family. So thank you to you guys for helping with that one as well. Ultimately, I can't think of many times where I woke up in the last 2 years and I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do about my kids' schooling. I've literally never had that thought, because I trust you. And I'm a dad. I got 4 kids in the system. And I think that you're going to give them your all every day. So thank you for that, and I appreciate that. Hopefully you guys can sleep easy knowing that Grand Forks Air Force Base is prepared for the threats that I briefed on a few weeks ago. And we'll take care of that responsibility. I'm asking you guys to help us with the responsibility of the education piece. So thank you for your time and attention. Thank you for what you do for my family, for our kids, and for generations to come. And I got a little bit of time, I think, if there are specific questions that you have for me or for any of our team. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Colonel Curry or any of the other team members here, including the base board members? Go ahead, Cynthia.
Well, you mentioned communication, so I don't know if you have specific, was the intention there just to say, do a good job with communication? Or did you have specific recommendations for us as to how to improve communication?
I think this is, the feedback I've received is not abnormal. Part of it has to do with the communication and when it comes. For example, we've all battled the pandemic and various guidances that come out with that. You just this week, I think, gave us some information on here's our plans going forward of what we are going to suggest. Prior to that, there is information that goes out. Sometimes that is vetted even with our team, our institutional partners team. What information from the school district that may need to come to command leadership teams early, we can start that messaging before it even fully comes out. And I think our people would appreciate that. But that's a twofold street thing that goes back to us too, to go, hey, can we have the opportunity to actually start to share this information before it comes out on a video or a slide or whatever? So how quickly can we get the information to us? There are a few more specifics that I'll leave to Lexi and the team with respect to feedback of maybe, I'd say, accuracy of communication. And we deal with that piece too. Sometimes you guys will put something out and you'll go, that's already changed. That's not, there's no fault in that. It's still information. We have to help with that process too, to partner with you to go, that wasn't actually where we are today. That's old information. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I appreciate the additional information, and thank you for your sharing tonight. I think that was really special.
You bet. I'm happy to talk about my family.
Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel Curry, as you look at the individuals who serve on the base board, they do full-time jobs protecting our nation, doing all of that. And they continually show up for these meetings with us at the base. And as I've gotten to know some of them, you have an amazing group of people serving the students. So as we think about their servitude and the leadership that you provide at the base, it's very comforting to know that we do sleep safely at night because you've got people doing their work. And hopefully we as a district can do our part, continue to do our part, as you have said, because it's nice to know that we have a collaborative piece in this community, and we should never lose that because you're very important to us, much more important to us than most people would realize. So thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Happy to do it. I actually just thought of one other thing, thinking back to that piece of, so this is a lesson learned for me, even though I've been here 2 years, I wasn't the wing commander. It's a different role, director of staff and vice wing commander. So I took my first phone call with respect to weather here, just a couple weeks ago. And we have to work through that process as a leadership team. In that, for the first time ever, the school made a decision to actually delay school on the base. I've never seen that before, just on our base. That was unique for me. So that's a communication piece too, and that has to do with my team of how do we communicate with the school district to go, hey, are we really going to delay, which is completely different than every other school in the district. That was a new thing for me and for our team. And it's just never seen that lesson before. You'll have new commanders and new command teams that sometimes we just need the information or the educational piece because we just haven't been in that situation. Whereas on the school district team, you have generally more continuity than we do.
Colonel Curry, I'm wondering if we could have Lexi introduce herself, and just especially for the downtown board people, just kind of what her role is so they know that, if you guys don't mind.
Come on up, Lexi.
All right, so hi, everybody. I'm Lexi Holsey. I'm the school liaison for the base. Oh. Thank you. Thanks. So basically, my role is to kind of be the go-between between the installation and the school districts. So I do service all the school districts in the area. So out in Larimore, Thompson, all the way up to Cavalier. So I work with a lot of different school districts. I'm also the STEM coordinator for the base. So just this last weekend, we had our drone tech workshop. You guys got to see some pictures of that. We'll also post those on Facebook so you can see those. Those opportunities are actually open to all students, not just students on Grand Forks Air Force Base. So I do try to push that out so all students have an opportunity to participate in that as well. If you guys have any specific questions for me or about what I do?
Questions for Lexi at all? Go ahead, Amber.
Lexi, this is just more of a personal question, but the last time we heard from the school liaison was before COVID. So you're a new face to all of us. Did you come here recently? Did you get here the day before COVID started, and then you tell us a little bit about
So
you.
I kind of came in the middle of the pandemic. I actually moved here last October. I was in a different role, and then I moved into the school liaison position in February. So I kind of hit the ground running, brand new to working with school districts, and I didn't really know how school boards operated, so that was kind of a very eye-opening kind of experience for me. But since I've been in the role, I've worked very closely with some of you, kind of working through issues, working with Sherry out at Twining. And I feel like it's been a great relationship so far. Sherry communicates things very well with me, things that she needs or she has concerns or questions. And then the school board as well, we've started to collaborate on some things. So I feel like things are coming together. With COVID, it's been kind of difficult to get into schools and really get to meet people and do some more things. But I think as things start to change and we're starting to see things get better, you'll see me out into the community a lot more.
Just have one more comment. I work with a lot of families who come to the area as a realtor, and I hear two things from military families. One is that they're very surprised by the lack of pre-K opportunities, and I think Colonel Curry, I have no idea what that would take to work with the state and our local school district, but I think that your story is very impactful as someone who is a representative of a military family, but you've also lived it through your kids. And so if there's any advocacy work or a plan that the district can come up with, you know, maybe testifying for a bill on the state level, I think you'd be a great person to do that. Secondly, the other piece that I hear is families who have come from overseas and they are enrolled in a dual language program, that they struggle with opportunities to continue building their skills because we're English speaking primarily here. And so, for instance, if someone came from Italy and they aren't hearing Italian every day, that they might lose that. So do you have programs or opportunities for tutors or translators that could work with some of those families if they need that?
So we do offer free tutoring services through tutor.com for military-connected students. So even if they're not active duty, if they're veterans or retirees or DoD civilians, they can utilize that program. And also DODEA has started an expanded eligibility pilot program. So to kind of bridge the gap between maybe courses that aren't offered here, they'll still have an opportunity to take some of those courses and maintain those skill levels.
Thank you both for being here. I think I'll turn it over to Dr. Brenner to wrap up this section, but thank you both.
Thank you.
Colonel Curry, Lexi, thank you very much for being here. Colonel, thank you for your comments this evening and specifically for your comments a couple of weeks ago, State of the Base. I would echo your feelings about the collaborative efforts between community, the city of Grand Forks, and the Grand Forks Air Force Base. I was privileged enough to serve as a principal at Carl Van Eielson and also Twining, and those were 5 of the best years of my life. So I just want to thank you again for being here, and we'll continue with our collaborative work, and we'll work on those communication pieces, particularly on storm days, sir. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, both of you. Let's move on to item 6C, which is the annual report for 2020-2021, which is on electronic pages 10 through 33. Ms. Galach and Dr. Lewis, I think you're up.
Good evening, board members. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you this evening. You will see in our annual report tonight, you will see overall data presented to you on enrollment. You'll also see student achievement data presented to you. And you'll see that in the aggregate, meaning all students, and you'll also see it broken down by various subgroups. And when I share about subgroups, what I mean is groups based on race and ethnicity, as well as students serviced on an IEP, as well as students receiving English language learner supports in our district. I wanted to start by just elevating our strategic priorities within the framework of academics, our high reliability schools framework, where we really have the foundation of academic engagement and strategies for student success, supported by our professional learning, technology, and innovation and creativity. Then having our comprehensive school and district mental health systems, where we have mental health, positive school climate and culture, those social emotional learning components, as well as our community engagement. And then what we've been working on a lot as a board and cabinet is really how we spend our resources and that long-term planning. So as you've heard me say in the past, is the budget dictating our teaching and learning environment, or are we really looking how to align our district resources to ensure that we have high-quality learning and teaching environments? Here in front of you, you'll see our student enrollment. This year we're at 7,272, and that's down a little bit from last year, but it's actually up from when we were in our pandemic. So we've seen families coming back to Grand Forks that maybe were doing homeschool or other options during the pandemic. So it's good to see that uptick this year. Here you'll see this year's student enrollment, and again, as I shared on the onset here, really looking at it broken down by our demographic groups. So you'll see here, of our student enrollment, about 66% of our students are white, and then you will see our next group for race is 2 or more races. In this presentation, you will see some of our student achievement data broken down by 2 or more race categories, and other places you will not. And I'll talk more about that as we get further into our presentation. Then you'll see right behind our 2 or more races, you'll see our Hispanic Latino ethnicity of 9.5%. And then you'll see Black at 6.6%. And then we have our students that identify as Native American, a little over 3%. And then our students that identify as Asian. So those are really the racial breakdown for a district, and then we have a small percentage of students identifying as Pacific Islander. This slide on the onset, I'm going to be very transparent with. It's a little bit deceiving. So you'll see there that asterisk. So for our last school year, 2021, percent of student population qualifying for free and reduced lunch is the same as 2019-20. And what the free and reduced lunch forms do is they really enable our families to get free or reduced lunch and free or reduced breakfast. But there's also a whole nother place of why this matters. This really matters because it generates funding for us for Title I dollars. And this district receives a lot of Title I dollars. And that is generated by the federal government through DPI. And they calculate it based on our free and reduced percentages. However, during the pandemic, one of the pieces that has been positive is that the government has issued that all students are eligible for free lunch and free breakfast, which is fantastic. However, we've seen significant drop in our return rates of our students and families wanting to declare and apply for free and reduced lunch. So the good news is that for last year's calculation and this year's calculation, DPI is letting us stay with the pre-pandemic rate. And there has been some chatter, even prior to the start of COVID, that the systems of how to designate schools and districts and the funding levels is a bit antiquated when it comes to free and reduced lunch. So they've just really been working on alternative methods. But for right now, this is where we are. If I were to give you what the actual free and reduced lunch rates are for last year and this year, it would be in the 20s. So we are very thankful that we can do that. Next year, we will be doing a very big push around this and working with individual schools as well, because October 1st is our cutoff that then calculates for the next year. So we really want to see our numbers back up so that we get those additional dollars that generate so many supports and services for our students and families in the district. Next, we have our special education enrollment, and in that middle column, you'll see the number of students that we serviced on an IEP, and then you will see our percent enrollment with an IEP within our school district. I will be honest, this is a little higher, our percentage, than I've seen in other districts that I have worked in. More like the 12 to 15% range is what I've seen in other districts as far as number of students served in an IEP. And this can entail students that are serviced through a speech IEP. This can entail students that are serviced in a self-contained program that's, for example, medically fragile. So it covers all students in our system that have an IEP. Here's our demographics for our special education. So you can see here what the overall population is based on our race and demographics. And I want to take you back to that very beginning slide. We would want to see in our special education data very similar demographics when we break it down by race and ethnicity. So as you're seeing here, we are higher in some of our race and ethnicity categories than we are in overall what you would see in our overall district enrollment. We also have different demographic rates when it comes to specific disability categories, where we see higher numbers of students of color with a specific disability category than we see in other areas. The next piece I wanted to share with you is our English language learner enrollments. And you'll see last year's count was 302 students. Our number of immigrant students was 269. Our number of refugee students was 135. I think this is wholly underreported. That's just my personal opinion here, but I wonder, one of the pieces that I wonder about here is if our families, there's a section where you can determine that you don't want to receive services. So I wonder if that's a factor, and that's a right that all of our students across the nation have to do that. But I was surprised when I pulled our data here. Here is our Fall Star Reading data. Fall Star Reading is an assessment that we give in our elementary and middle school. It's not like our high-stakes state testing that we give in the spring. This really gives our teachers and our school staff and our principals and all of us that work at the district level a good glimpse into how our students are doing. So you'll see here the results are broken down. On the left-hand side, you'll see all of our students here in Grand Forks. The blue is our percent below benchmark. So you're seeing about 43% of our students are performing at the below benchmark, and 57% of all of our students are performing at the benchmark or above. You'll see as we go through how that breaks down based on race and ethnicity. So for example, if you look in, you'll see our Native American students are at 69% below benchmark, versus when that's compared to our white students, it's 38%. It's really important as a school system that we do look at our demographic data this way, because as you can see, if you look overall in that all students category, it's a very different overall percentage than if you really drill down by our subgroups. And then we can really see how each of our subgroups are doing. Very similar here with our Fall Star Mathematics. And again, if you look at our percentage below benchmark of Native American students, you can see 73% are scoring below that benchmark. And you can see with our white students, it's more like 30%. So again, another place of where we need to look at our race and our ethnicity data. Here we have it broken down by our special education data as well. So you'll see on the left-hand side, our students served on an IEP, percent below benchmark, 81%. And our students that are receiving ELL services, percent below, 63%. This does not mean that our teachers, that our special education teachers are not doing their job. This does not mean that our teachers that are our ELL teachers are not doing a good job. This means we need to really look at, what does that first good instruction look like? What does that tier 1 look like? Where are we putting in support so that all of our students have that access to grade level standard with the appropriate scaffolds that really ensure mastery of their standard? How do we have good co-teaching practices in our classrooms? So again, this is really about looking at areas that we can enhance. Similar here for our math data. You will see our students served on an IEP, 76% are below that benchmark, and 57% of our students receiving ELL services. I'm transitioning now to our NDSA, which is our state testing. That was not given in the school year 2020, but it was given this past spring. Remember how I said sometimes we have 2 or more races and other times we don't. One of what I think is a very good investment and selection of our district is the Panorama software that we have. So Panorama really allows us to pull so many different custom reports. And one of those pieces is now we are able to pull demographic data that includes 2 or more races. And again, I think that's very important for our school district because as you can see, that's a pretty large subgroup within our school system. However, the state of North Dakota at this time still does not recognize 2 or more races as a demographic. So when we have this state level data, you're going to see it broken down in this manner. However, we are working on that integration of our NDSA data to go into Panorama, and hopefully, even though the state does not report it out, we'll be able to drill down and have that data with all of our race and ethnicity groups. So here you'll see our achievement data is very similar to what our STAR data showed us from the fall. Very similar where you're seeing our students of color not at the same proficiency level as our white students or the all students category. And that's in our English language arts. Very similar here in our math area. Again, we're looking at our white students performing at about 43% proficient, and then you can see Native at 20, our Hispanic students at 22, Black at 24, and Asian at 45. So pretty significant discrepancies by race and ethnicity here. Here are how our students serviced on IEPs are performing with respect to our NDSA. Again, very similar to what we saw with our STAR assessment, where we're seeing a little under 11% of our students serviced on an IEP in English language arts performing at the proficient or the advanced. And then for math, under 10%, just a little bit under 10% for our students serviced on an IEP on our state level testing. Now I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Galach to share with us some additional data.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. One of the things I want to give Dr. Lewis props for is just what she described is really pushing us to disaggregate our data. I think it's really important as we continue to move forward in our HRS initiatives, as she mentioned, so that we can really drill in on our instructional practices. And clearly we have some work to do around that. So thank you again, Dr. Lewis, for that. The slide in front of you is about our advanced placement courses. You will notice here what I'm going to cite as the pandemic effect. As you're very well aware, we had nearly 1,000 secondary students learning full-time online last year. And in particular, our AP courses and AP course enrollment suffered because of that. It was really difficult. There were a number of students who did partake in AP classes independently We tried to augment that support through building level tutorials and access to the AP programming and that sort of thing. But many of those students let go early on in the process because of the rigor of the AP. And so you're going to see a direct effect of that on the enrollment. And again, I'm going to call that the pandemic effect. Otherwise, you can see that the number of, excuse the expression, butts in seats last year for AP was 305 in the district, which represents about 18.5% of students eligible for taking AP courses. Basically, any student so inclined and so driven can enroll in an AP class, so there's no sort of prerequisite there. As far as dual credit courses go, you will see a less of an impact there. Our dual credit students benefited from a variety of constructs there, the NDCDE for the distance learners, paired with Lake Region's online learning programs, paired with our in-house programs. We really were able to serve students who wanted to invest in dual credit courses better last year during the pandemic because of those that multitude of platforms. The prereqs for dual credit courses are a 3.0 GPA is suggested, and then a recommendation from administration. There are opportunities for students who may be dipping below that as long as they have the recommendations and the supports in place to participate in dual credit. And you can see listed across the top there just the wide variety of courses available to our students. Some people ask the difference between AP and dual credits. Typically, dual credit classes will for sure earn collegiate credit in our local institutions. AP is generally a little more broad-reaching. In both cases, there are times when institutions will not accept a full credit for a specific major. So the best example is always around the medical field. They may or may not accept a dual credit class for a specific medical class credit, depending on the specialty area that a student might be going into. As for our ACT scores, you can see these listed here for 2021. The district average score was 19.97 compared to the state average composite score of 19.15, and you can see the national score itself at 20.7. I also want to remind the board that our state of North Dakota and our district uses the ACT for the benchmark data. So instead of taking a North Dakota State assessment, we opt to use the ACT to represent our scores and our proficiency levels for our kids. So therefore, all of our students in grade 11 take that. We are one of 11 states in which all students take the ACT assessment. So just a little bit of background information for you there. On the next slide, you can see the composite scores broken down by ethnicity. And again, it tells a little bit different of a story there. When you take a look at the GFPS average of 19.97, you can see where our white students score above that average. I'm working backwards up the chart there. Hispanic students score below, Black students score below, and our Asian students score right near the mark. You'll notice missing from that subgroup is our Native population. That is because there was too small of a subset to report out there, which in and of itself is telling to us is that we want to make sure that we are following up and ensuring that all students are taking the assessment so that we can encourage that post-secondary pathway and know how to support students according to that data. My final slide before I pass the microphone to Mr. Berge to talk his favorite topic, money, is the teacher demographics slide. You will see an increase in the number of staff members that we had on board last year. Again, pandemic effect. We had to hire a whole cadre of full-time online teachers to serve students, both at the elementary and the secondary level. Those are one-year contracts for the vast majority of those. And again, between the elementary and secondary, it was nearly 2,000 kids that we served full-time online. While we maintained the same staffing levels in the buildings because of wanting to have smaller class sizes, the alternate schedules. I don't want to bring us a flashback into times that we were hoping to move on from, but that is really why that number is differently slanted there. And at the bottom, you can see how the FTE count is calculated according to ELL and special education teachers and classroom teachers. And the rest of them are the ancillary staff members ranging from librarians to OT to social workers, et cetera. Mr. Berge.
Thank you, Catherine. Two slides for me here. The slide that you see is the revenue and expenditures for last fiscal year. This is a required part of the annual report, and these numbers are the same as what I reported in August as far as year-end totals unaudited, so we're waiting upon audited results. So this is a repeat of what we had in August reporting numbers for the year-end June 30th of 2021. Last slide here is the comparative school district mill levies for the various schools. And so this is last fiscal year. So you can see Grand Forks was the lowest at 101 mills amongst the comparative communities. Of course, in September, we were successful in raising the building fund mill levy by 10 mills. So we will be at 111 mills for the current fiscal year that we're in. As a side note, Minot is having a referendum vote here on December 7th they're hoping to raise their mill levy fairly significantly. So just a comparative look at the mill levies. And I believe that ends the annual report.
Any further comments from the three musketeers down there? Okay. Well, let's open it up for clarifying questions or comments from board members. Well, I've got one for you, Brenda. You know, the data is really compelling in looking at children of color versus white. What will be the plan going forward? Not I don't expect a detailed plan, but what is kind of you're going to work it with different committees and things like that. What just kind of an overall, umbrella of what you think we're going to need to be doing?
Thanks for that great question, President Lund. Really, the work has already started. We have been working with our admin teams on just what we did here, really looking at our data by race, using our new panorama software to see that, but then really working on what does culturally responsive teaching actually look like? What are those systems in our school district that are marginalizing our students of color? And oftentimes, those aren't intentional pieces, but they are pieces, for example, the not having a hat or a head covering in our schools. For African American girls specifically, or girls that have, my girls, their hair, when they wear their hair natural, it would be nice for them to have a little kerchief they can wear. Sometimes that makes them feel more comfortable. It's those types of pieces that we're really examining and looking at. And then I talked about it just a little bit in the presentation, really looking at what are those scaffolds we need to do with Tier 1 instruction. So what I mean when I say Tier 1 instruction is all of our students during English language arts, looking at too, our students that have interventions, not having that during the instructional time for that English language arts block, because while they're getting remediation, they can't be missing that new content. And also, how do we make sure that all of our students have access to that grade level standard with, again, those stair steps to get them to that standard? And it's really about those pieces. How do we coach our teachers and staff? What is the appropriate professional development? How do we really leverage our PLC work to do this type of data and move beyond? A lot of our school systems will do what I call admiring the data, which is what we did here tonight. But how do we then really move to actionable steps? How are we measuring that? How are we giving our staff the support to do that? How are we elevating student voice? How are we also reaching out to our parents that are wanting different approach to communication, different approach to involvement? How are we doing that? So those are a few pieces to that work.
Thank you. Other board questions? Go ahead, Amber.
Along with the DEI piece, I'm curious, and this might be a little bit of a stretch for another topic, but has the DEI committee received this report, and are they being involved in some of these conversations?
Very good question. Thank you. Our DEI team has not received the report. All of our district administrators did. We have, I am launching with a planning steering committee, so we're meeting like December 1st, a small group of us to really plan out that work together. So it's not just Brenda writing the agendas and doing that. So we're using that steering team committee. But I like your idea. I'll actually send out this annual report to them to let them know these pieces. And once the stream is ready, I'll send them the recording too. I think that's a very good suggestion. Thanks for
Okay.
that.
Thank you. I just have a couple smaller questions. Do you have desegregated data on not just race, but like those students in foster care or those who are on, who receive like Title I services, or how many open enroll in special ed versus that are living in our city? And how do you use that data?
We can definitely pull the foster care data and have that piece. As far as students receiving Title I supports, we can pull it by school. But as far as like all of the students at Lake Agassiz, for example, benefit in some way from Title I dollars, whether it's through an interventionist, whether it's through other programs that we have there. So it's not something I could pull by student for like a Title I service, but I can definitely pull it from our schools that receive Title I, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Amber, I forgot your last question there.
I think I'm mostly just interested in the understanding of kids who are in poverty or below the poverty line. You know, I think the assumption would be made that sometimes their basic needs aren't even being met, you know, whether it be at home or just when they come to school. And so how do you even begin to want to teach them, you know, math and reading and stuff when they're at this level of basic needs just being met and they just need love and care, right? So I think part of my question is just how that data is being desegregated to really focus on those basic needs.
We can do some work around free and reduced price lunch. Students that qualify, again, I question the accuracy this year of that data.
Sure, yeah.
Secondly, there's only certain of us by design for a very good reason that have access to that data by student. So I think your question's very valid. I do think that work is better done through looking at different schools. So what I mean by that is our schools that are heavier impacted by poverty than others. And that's, I don't want to say that's a better way to drill down the data, but we just have to be really careful about drilling down data as far as free reduced price lunch, number one, for confidentiality, and number two, I just don't trust, Amber, the validity of that data currently. But I agree. It's really about how do we have those wraparound services in our schools to ensure, like you said, basic needs are met. But really, it's also about how do we change the trajectory of those children's lives?
Yeah.
And that's really a piece that our diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging work is needing to focus on, is how to change those trajectories. And then you also asked me about special education enrollments from out of district. We can get those numbers to you as well.
Okay. My last question is just the dual credit courses. I know here there seems to be some courses that might be under the Career Impact Academy. And so if there's a course that's taught at both, would we anticipate that some of these dual credit courses would then get just taught under the academy per se? And then do you anticipate some of these numbers increasing as a result of having sort of that one-stop shop where those are offered?
That's a great question, and I think it's a question that the programming committee has been fleshing out. It would make all the sense in the world, and it's one of the beauties of the collaboration with the public entities that are present tonight and that you're going to hear from in a little bit, as far as Lake Region and UND and our friends across the river, is that those opportunities are there and they should be expanded upon. Amber, I think one of the benefits of the Career Impact Academy, to give a little teaser, is that not only would it be the academic content, but there would be the ability to have some more of that hands-on application, which I think the hypothesis is just what you described. It would increase opportunities for kids and maybe attract some kids that elsewise might be shying away from those sorts of opportunities.
Cynthia?
So I had a couple clarifying questions, all for Dr. Lewis. First of all, I want to make sure I understood what you clarified with regards to the free and reduced lunch. So are you saying that you think it would be, the number of students would actually be higher or lower than what that number states?
So the number that I put on the slide for you is our official Title I revenue generating count. So that is us being able to default to pre-pandemic percentage. Our actual percentage, like for this year, is around 21-ish%. So what I mean by that is that the numbers of the 37 that you're seeing, that is not what our actual count is. That is DPI allowing us for title dollar purposes to generate that. What I'm saying is I have found in my work, and I don't think Grand Forks is an exception, that our free and reduced lunch rates are actually far underrepresented compared to our students and families that actually would qualify.
I think I misheard what you said, so thank you. I apologize to the board if that wasn't clear. Then so I have 2 questions and 1 comment. So my second question is the IEP. You made a comment on that you think this is higher than typically seen. Do you have any speculation as to why?
Sure, and I was just citing what the national averages are in other districts I've worked in. No, I would have to dig in more to see what really the factors are there with respect to this. I will say I didn't compare that with other North Dakota districts. I'm speaking more from my lens in Minnesota and Maryland and DC public schools.
Thank you. And then the last one, I think, especially for EL students, and this is kind of obvious, but specific ways to communicate to parents how they can help their children at home in non-academic school kind of language. So that's just kind of a comment.
Oh, did you want a response on that?
Oh, if you would like to respond, that would be great.
One of the game changers that has really helped districts that have, I'll call them more urban populations. I do consider some of our schools in Grand Forks to have those more, certain schools here have higher percentages of students of color than others. And one of the game changers has been what we've designed as parent academies. And that's really what you just shared about, is where we outreach to parents and we have it in their native language, and we do what does it mean to support your child in math? What does it mean to support your child with the FAFSA application? Why is that important? What do you need to do as a parent for your child that's college bound? What's the difference between your child got 100% scholarship or financial aid, yet you're still on the hook for a $1,700 housing deposit? Why is that? What does that look like? So those are just some examples. What does mental health look like? And really making that culturally appropriate, because in some cultures there is different feelings around mental health and some different stigmas as well. So really having those parent academies for our families, I have seen have really helped with that involvement and that engagement, and just doing that in different ways, and ways that are more appealing and not as threatening, because some of our families feel really welcome into our schools and other families feel like, I'm not sure what the norms are here and how to operate in that.
Well, if I just might comment, I was really privileged to attend an IEP and at Century School, and it was phenomenal. It was very long, and it was 2 hours and a half. And it's, you're looking at a table of 8 or 9 professionals. So it's overwhelming. And then I think those takeaway points, just because you're absorbing so much information. So I like that idea a lot. The staff did a great job. It's just, it is really overwhelming.
Thank you. Other clarifying questions, comments? Go ahead.
I don't think mine's really so much of a question as a comment, but as I'm thinking about all of this, I'm thinking there might be some room in the future, depending on what your group sort of looks at and decides on reallocation of resources within the district. And so if we have a school that may have some higher needs students, maybe they're covered under Title I, but maybe there's something else there that's needed as well, right? And so I hope that the board's open to sort of looking at what's equality versus equal distribution. And then the other thing I think is a factor and sometimes is missing on these pieces is the role of discipline. As it pertains to students and what we see sort of as some trends with the students of color, kind of hitting all of those intersections, right, where we have home resources and cultural differences and all of those things kind of intermingling. So one of the things I had hoped, we would dig into quite a bit, and maybe that kind of falls more in this realm, is looking at how discipline might be affecting some of these, differences in learning as well.
I think that's a really good point. We are working on getting our panorama, all of the referrals to feed in there accurately, so then we'll be able to deseg exactly the way that you saw that. Another piece I wanted to elevate in addition to that is also attendance, and really looking at our chronic absenteeism rates, looking at that by our different categories, our focus groups that I shared, as well as looking at, again, what are the supports that we need, and looking at from a resource standpoint, how do we really look to align our resources so that we ensure that all of our schools have that well-rounded teaching and learning environments with that specific lens on some of our schools do look different than other schools.
Brent. Go ahead, Brent.
Have you considered using twining as kind of like a base demographic? In theory, all the students culturally have the same home life experience, so you might be able to rule out some of those subsets of the home experience from the policy that's actually within the school system.
I think that's a good suggestion to look at, and we do have, just as you illustrated, large representation of our demographic groups there. So I think that's a really good suggestion. Thank you for that.
Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very briefly, first off, I try to live in a colorblind world, i.e. the people that I meet are the people that I meet. A student is important despite their demographics, despite the color of their skin, despite the religious beliefs that come from the family. I've talked to Ms. Galach about this, and I'm perhaps getting a little deeper in the weeds than I should as a school board member, but the relationships that the instructors, the paras, the custodians, the principal, the people in the school make with the students is paramount. There's a great book that I recently read by Dr. Bruce Perry. He's actually a native North Dakotan who's known globally. And he wrote this book with Oprah, and it's not because she's famous, it's because of her growing up. And it's called What Happened to You? So when a child has struggled or made a mistake, or they're not attending school, rather than dealing with what happened at that moment, you ask the student very simply, what happened to you? And you're polite, and you reach out, and you understand. And perhaps that's the start of a relationship that matters. Oh, and then we can start the educational piece. Because without a relationship, the child will not learn. And I know that we could turn to you, Mr. Olson, being the teacher at the table, you would understand what we're saying here, but relationships are paramount. Without them, the child will continue to struggle. So what happened to you is a very important question. We as adults should ask each other that when somebody is struggling. Family members are struggling. Neighbors are struggling. Something is up that's caused that. Let them speak and use your ears and then follow through appropriately. And I apologize for getting in the weeds. I know I shouldn't have done that as a school board member, yet I'm very passionate about this book. He wrote another book earlier called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. And it's very traumatic stories of children who've experienced things that none of us would hope would ever happen, yet in reality it does. Thank you.
Go ahead, Catherine, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to thank the board for its thoughtful commentary. You know, one of the things I want to remind us about is what the opening slide was when we look at our strategic priorities, and everything that you mentioned today really is outlined in our strategic plan. So kind of going in reverse order, you know, Mr. Douth, that you talk about relationships, that's a core component of the middle column as far as a comprehensive district mental health system with social emotional learning. Relationship is at the heart of positive school climate and culture, as is culturally responsive teaching. The strategies to help make sure that we are having solid Tier 1 instruction for all kids falls underneath the high reliability schools academic framework. And then you hit the nail on the head there, Jackie. You know, we're going through this process of budget realignment, which is hard. But one of the key priority areas that we've already cited, that you've already alluded to, is in the school board preparatory work, is making sure that we are resourcing where we need to in accordance to the data. So thank you for the thoughtful commentary, and you just reinforced the work that was in that guiding planning document.
Any final clarifying questions? Thank you. Great discussion. Let's move on to item D, which is impact aid funding update on pages 34 through 42. Mr. Berge.
Thank you. And for those of you that were looking at the base packet, it's starting page 27, but the information is the same. And we have it on screen here. So I'm just going to take just a few minutes to kind of walk through impact aid funding, which impacts our Air Force Base School District. And there's conferences every year in DC. This year I attended it virtually in September, and a lot of the data that from that is up on screen here. So the main thing one quick thing I'll point out is from a funding aspect, you know, if we look at the federal government's total spending, now this is actually a bit outdated. It's about 4 years old, but I think the ratio is relatively similar. If you look at that tiny yellow sliver there, the 2%, that's the non-discretionary area of the federal budget. That's just education. So from a federal government standpoint, or I should maybe backtrack, educationally, most significant funding for education comes from state and local governments and taxpayers. Impact aid, looking at kind of that overview, it shows the the funding levels of federal impact aid around the country in the various states. You can see in North Dakota, kind of that light blue between $16 and $20 million. There's 1,159 impacted school districts in every state and some of the islands. Local revenue, I've got in the lower part of the screen there, local revenue in Grand Forks School District, the in-town district is about 25% of revenue for our district. Going to the next page, the basic support is what's under section 7003. Off to the right, you can see the number of students that are federally connected. It's about 776,000. Not quite half of that are directly military impacted students. And then we have various other categories there. And you can see if the program was fully funded, that would be about $2.25 billion. Actual funding is along the lines of about $1.3 billion. This is kind of a busy slide here, but I just want to point out a couple things regarding funding. The program itself has not been fully funded since 1969. The areas, kind of more specific to the where the funding gaps are in the constructions and the facilities lines. You can see construction and facilities each year is the same number. You see, combine the construction and the facilities dollars, that's about $22.25 million. That's been the same for, I think, between 9 and 10 years running, so that amount has been flat. And of course, construction inflation, obviously in the last year, has been significant, but even without the outlier of recent years, inflation related to construction and facilities is fairly significant, but the funding has been very flat. You can see, the basic support payment is growing each year, and unfortunately, from the federal government perspective, the disability payments at $48.32 million has been flat as well. So, so again, annually for facilities for impact aid is $22.25 million, has been for about 10 years. If we were to go back to 1950, the allocation was $99 million for facilities, and that was in 1950 dollars. So if you were to extrapolate that to current, it would be, I don't know, it'd be 300 million or probably more versus the 22 million. And so again, that 22 million is for, let's see here, it's divided up, actually, generally gets divided up amongst a handful of school districts each year because that amount is so small. But that 22 million is intended, or not intended, but it results in being over about 1,160 school districts. So payments for the Grand Forks Air Base District for construction have varied from 0 to 25 to upwards of maybe $80,000 or $90,000. So relatively low on the construction side of the equation. Next slide here. There is some legislation outstanding. I'm not sure exactly where things are at, but there was some legislation that would add about $65 million to impact aid funding. So we will see where that goes. There was another bill. It was part of the infrastructure, the large $1.75 trillion federal bill, but unfortunately there was no additional school district infrastructure funds included in there. That was eliminated from the bill. Just more infrastructure, just in general on its own here. The national NAFIS put together a study in 2017, and again, amongst the 1,160-ish roughly school districts federally impacted, about more than $4.2 billion in facility needs were identified as of about 4 years ago. And when we look locally at our facility Twining, we do wonderful work out at Twining, but there are definitely some needs out there. And if you look at in the box in the lower left corner, what the respondents indicated were more of the unmet construction type needs. At the low end, emergency repairs, the technology, capacity, in some cases, roofing, HVAC, and general modernizations, and that really we can see as a parallel with our needs here locally. Lastly, if we look at impact aid funding, the amount varies a bit from year to year. The federal impact aid program is the only K-12 education program that is not forward funded. So technically, every year the amount starts at 0, and there's no guaranteed funding for the following year. So the timing and variability in the payments can be somewhat dramatic. In the last 3 or 4 years, it's been relatively stable, but looking back to prior years, there was some cases where the final payment for a particular school year was not received until 3 or 4 years after the fact. And now we're seeing things relatively stable in the timing, generally received in the year of the school year or the following year. But you can see the funding received has been in that 3.2, some increases and decreases. The most recent fiscal year, just over $4 million. It's a little unique in that this federal impact aid funding is, one thing I skipped over on a slide earlier was that up in the blue area there, really a big part of the reason federal impact aid funding exists is that the federal government does not pay property taxes, and so this is really meant to be a replacement for state taxes and local property taxes. So along with the federal, with our air-based school district, along with the federal funding received, there is a North Dakota per pupil payment that goes along with every student in the state of North Dakota. However, for, I don't know if it's the last 30, 40 years or potentially longer, I guess, probably since 2013 when the state funding model changed significantly, the state reduces the federal impact aid payment by 75% in calculating what the state payment is. So you can see on screen, for example, for the most recent fiscal year, the average payment per student was about $7,455. The state of North Dakota reduced that by 75%. So really the net received by the school district was $3,265. And so that's been ongoing, probably for quite some time, but impacted more so since 2013 when the state really increased their portion of the payment. In addition to the numbers you see on screen, there's separate impact aid payments for students with disabilities, and that's varied from roughly $100,000 to $150,000 per year. This last legislative session, a bill was passed that's going to eliminate the 75% state reduction over the next 6 years. So in our 21 to 22 fiscal year, we should see roughly about $375,000 more out of our impact aid, and eventually we will receive that net $3.5 to $4 million per year. So a lot of numbers there. The presentation year to year is relatively the same, just with kind of new legislation kind of pops in a little bit here and there.
Clarifying questions from Mr. Berge. Go ahead, Jackie.
I can't hit it right. So those at home and maybe in some people around the table. So the state deduces this, right, by 75%. Where does that money go? Does it stay at the federal government? Does it go to our state government?
In effect, it's a reduction, or it ultimately results in the state paying out less, is what that is. So now over the course of the next 6 years, that reduction will go away.
Any other clarifying questions? Thank you, Scott. Let's move on to item E, which is curriculum review. And Ms. Galatch, it's on electronic pages 43 through 45. I'm not sure of the base packet, what pages it's on, but.
Thank you, President Lunn. As you mentioned, on page 43 of the in-town packet and page, thank you, of the base board packet, you will see a memo from me outlining the recent work of the Curriculum Review Committee. You can see there's a broad representation of voices on that committee. We have teachers, we have counselors, we have administrators, curriculum specialists, and the like, reviewing proposals that come to us. The reason the proposals come at this time of the year is because it gives us a chance to vet them, to make sure that they are proposals that make sense in alignment with not only our strategic priorities, but the current course offerings available to students, and looking to fill any sort of gaps, wanting to make sure that we have a course catalog that reaches the needs and the relevancy needs of our students. If you look at the next page, you can see the descriptions of the proposals. You'll be asked to vote for approval of these proposals at the ensuing board meeting. So this is just for informational purposes. The first course tandem that we entertained was Introduction to Personal Finance and Advanced Personal Finance. The short story there is that our current finance class really runs a broad spectrum of topics. And what the instructors have found is that the breadth of the curriculum is so expansive that it's very difficult to address it all in a short period of time. And B, there are different topics that make sense to a student developmentally at different stages. So this proposal here breaks it into 2 semester-based classes, one geared towards freshman, sophomore level students primarily, which is more the basics of finance, planning forward, et cetera. You can see the credits, the savings, checkings accounts, et cetera, budgeting. And then for the upper grade levels where they're looking at college planning about what to do with their finances once they graduate, including things like Roth IRAs. This is a class that the feedback around it from the students is that it's 100% relevant, and we all know that we deal with finances throughout the course of our life. The second proposal is around a ceramics or sculpting class. The difference in this class than current art offerings is that it's a very hands-on, literally tactile experience. The current scope and sequence of the art curriculum involves a variety of mediums, the painting, the drawing, et cetera, and there are a lot of students who shy away for two reasons. Number one is they don't see themselves as a drawer or a painter, but really what they have found is that in the sculpting units, it really applies or appeals to a wider variety of students, including many of our students who find it almost therapeutic to work in modalities such as clay and other sorts of hands-on materials. The second thing about this class that is attractive is that will be a semester versus a year-long course. Right now, students have to commit to a full years of art, and some students shy away from that because of the commitment. So we are in support of the ceramics and sculpting course as well. And then finally, an exciting class that came back to us after being sent from the committee for more meat on the bone, for lack of a better word, is around a dual credit Native American Studies class. You heard me say earlier that the GEPA recommendation for a dual credit class is to be 3.0 and with an accompanying letter of recommendation. The instructor in this class would actually like there to be a 2.0 grade point average with an accompanying recommendation to try to make sure that we are appealing to students who might be, for whatever reason, shying away from courses, or maybe they've had just not the greatest road or had a hard time during the pandemic and it affected their GPA. So we're hoping that this class not only expands our DEI awareness, allows students to dig into the great cultural heritage of our region, but also scoops in additional students with interest in this course. It will be taught by a university professor, and our curriculum specialist, Lorraine O'Shea, has been pivotal in bringing this course to fruition. So again, we'll be coming back to you next time we meet for approval on these 3 course additions. Are there any questions that I can entertain at this time?
Any clarifying questions? Cynthia?
Just to make sure, the intro to personal finance is still not required, even though it says that personal finance is a course that numerous constituents believe students should take.
Correct. It is not a prerequisite. And it is geared towards grades 9 and 10 students, but upper students can also gain access to the course if a teacher recommends it or a counselor recommends it. So it's not intended to be exclusive in that regard either.
Ceramics course, is that just for one of the schools or both of the high schools, or?
It will be offered at both campuses, and that's when it says approved with modifications. That's one of the final pieces that had to be put in place, is to make sure that the right supports and materials were in place at both campuses. And so we had a few questions that weren't answered at committee that the combo teams between the 2 schools are discussing, and it looks like they're moving in the direction of what's described here. And we'll be able to offer it on both campuses.
The last question, the 10 to 12 dual credit course, just for my own sake, is that the number of credits is about the same as other dual credit courses?
Yep, it'll align directly, and interestingly, and I failed to point this out, is that this will actually be a course that is taught synchronously but via technology, and so students won't have to travel to attend the course, and we're also looking into the possibility of recording it so that students at community high school who are on a completely different type of schedule can participate in this dual credit class as well. It really aligns with what Colonel Curry was saying there, that we need to expand our technology, how technology is available to students and accessing different types of curricular experiences. So we're excited about that component as well.
Any other clarifying questions? If not, thank you, and we'll look forward to talking
I think
about it.
Doug had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Doug. I didn't see it on there.
I don't know if this is the time to ask it or if it would be actually when it came for approval, but as we're going through that budget process and maybe looking at reductions, how does adding in classes fit into that whole perspective?
That's a great question. Every one of these offerings is considered cost neutral in the sense that it would just be a realignment of the current staff that are teaching. And at the high school level, a lot of times the number of sections that any given instructor teaches is dependent on the enrollment in those sections. So really, it would be a cost neutral option in the end.
Thank you, Catherine. We'll look forward to going back. We're going to turn it over to Michelle for the next couple of items on the agenda.
Thank you. For those following the base board agenda, this is item 5E. You can find it on page 39 on your electronic copy. I would like to turn it over for our monthly enrollment report to Dr. Lewis.
I had the wrong packet up. My apologies. That would make a difference. Okay. So as we saw for our K through 5, we had a decrease of 7 students from September. So we're at 231 students. For our middle school, we had a decrease of 1 student. So we're at 72 students. Overall, though, again, we still continue to be up at Twining by 25 students over the past year. So again, still seeing that increase in enrollment.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. Are there any questions or comments regarding our enrollment at the base? Perfect. Thank you. Then I'd like to now move on to item F on the board packet. On page 40, I'd like to pass that over to Mr. Berge.
Thank you, President Shepherd. We have we're going to have a midterm vacancy in the airbase at the airbase board once again. And state law, as referenced in Century Code and our Grand Forks Air Force Base School District Policy 2006, provide for the appointment of a school board member when a vacancy occurs prior to the regular selection. And unfortunately, we have a midterm vacancy due to one of the board members moving off base, and that's not allowable to remain on the board if not living on the military installation. And so the opening will be advertised at the Grand Forks Air Force Base, Twining School, and on the school district website. Applications will be available there, or contacting my office via my email, which is disclosed there, and phone number. And a copy of the application is attached. This is a process we've gone through a few times over the last couple of years. A closing date to submit applications of Monday, January 10th is suggested. And as per Grand Forks Air Force Base School Board policy, the school board would make the appointment at the January 18th board meeting at Twining. The appointee shall be eligible to serve upon approval of by the base commander, and if an appointee is denied approval by the commander, the school board shall select another appointee until such time as the commander approves the appointment. And Lexi will get you some information here, for your records, and make sure that we keep the communications open in regards to this position. Okay. Are there any questions I can answer?
Any questions from the board? So one thing I would like to bring to the table for discussion is the fact that despite having this midterm vacancy, we did slightly discuss at our last board meeting when we came to find out that Mr. Snyder was going to be disqualified from being a part of our board, was the fact that if you look at the process that it takes to put the application out for our base affiliates to advertise it, for the interview process and all of that stuff, by the time that gets done and sent up to Colonel Curry for approval and then passed on, we'd be looking at the board member possibly attending one board meeting before we stop in May. So with that, I'd like to discuss possibly even waiting. We talked about until our actual regular appointee in May. Do I have any discussion or questions Thoughts on that? Okay, perfect. Thank you, Dr. Sorry, Mr. Berge.
I'm definitely not a doctor, but thank you.
Yeah, if you get sick, don't call Scott, okay? Just like, if you got a tax issue, don't call me. So let's move on to item F, which is Dr. Brenner's evaluation reflection. As you remember, Dr. Brenner couldn't be at the last meeting, so he wanted to just talk about his thoughts on that. Dr. Brenner?
Thank you, Dr. Lund. I appreciate that. We're right back on schedule at 7:39 for the people who are patiently waiting in the audience. I promise that this will be short unless the board makes it longer than it needs to be. First of all, I want to thank all of you, as my cover memo indicates, just for providing feedback. Feedback, particularly in a narrative form, is really powerful, and I do appreciate that. I also appreciate when you reach out to me individually with thoughts or comments, whether it's through email, text message, or a phone call, or just stopping by to visit. I do appreciate that feedback, and I do listen. So some of the takeaways that I had based on the feedback that you gave me is I'm going to provide quarterly reports of the strategic plan. And what I would like to do is do this in January, March, and May, and get back to those quarterly type reports. And I can attach that to Friday Focus unless the board would like to see it at the board table. So I can, if you have feedback on that, you don't have to give it to me right now, but you can certainly provide that to Dr. Lund or me directly, and I'll certainly honor your request, whether you'd like it here at the board table or in Friday Focus. And I'll really be leaning on my colleagues who have a lot of the deliverables in the strategic plan to provide those narratives, and I want to make sure that they get credit for that work. That's not necessarily work that I do. It might be some work that I orchestrate, but we've got people who are doing some major heavy lifting here. Secondly, it's been brought up a couple of times to link school board meeting agenda items to the strategic plan, and I think we can do that. It might be a link on the side of the agenda that you can click on, and then that will just pull up the piece of the strategic plan you're looking for, or it might be just putting the strategic plan in your board packets at every meeting. And again, I'll take some feedback on that as well. And we'll continue with our quarterly board education topics. We started that with Amy Barch here a couple of meetings ago, and she's back on the docket on December 13th. And certainly the information that Dr. Lewis and Ms. Kalach provided tonight is compelling, and I hope that there was a realization tonight that the hiring of Dr. Brenda Lewis is a game changer for our school district. So thank you, Brenda, for providing that overview. We are in the process of reshaping Cabinet Advisory Council. The way that's been structured during my first 3 years as superintendent is meeting once a month and having all administrative stakeholder groups represented at the table. But that doesn't mean everybody was at the table. So we just started last Thursday, our first time, where all administrators are welcome to attend that. They help craft and formulate the agenda, just like Teacher Advisory Council. They are the people who have their ear to the ground, and those are topics driven by them. There'll be some topics that we put on the agenda from a cabinet perspective, but we want to make sure that from a grassroots perspective, they're providing those conversations and talking points as well. And when appropriate, provide a video message update to parents in the broader community related to school district information. And you'll get to see your first opportunity on Wednesday of this week based on how the conversation goes later on about Smart Restart. I would like to push that out in a video message to our parent group on Wednesday, and we'll use Blackboard Connect to push that out, and then we can archive that on our website as well for the broader community. And then certainly providing a note of gratitude to our parent community for all they've had to endure over the last 21 months working through this pandemic alongside with us. So those are some of my takeaways. Those are observational, they're measurable, and there'll be a product for you to see that as well. So that's what I have, Dr. Lund.
Thank you, Dr. Brenner. Any clarifying questions? Seems pretty straightforward. Thank you. Let's move on to item 7, which is superintendent's recommendations for action. 7A is consent agenda. Do I have a motion and a second for the consent?
Motion to approve.
Motion by Cynthia and a second by Bill Palmasino. Assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Item 7B is Career Impact Academy funding application. Dr. Brenner.
Thank you, Dr. Lunn. Well, I'm on page 50 of the electronic packet for the city board, and I'm sorry I don't have the page number in front of me for the base board. There isn't? Okay. Okay, you'll follow this. All right, so at our last meeting, we had District Grant Writer Tanya Schleicher, CTA Executive Director Eric Ripley, who's not with us tonight, EDC President Keith Lund, Becca Kruger, also from the EDC, JLG Architect Mike McLean was here, along with City Administrator Todd Phelan. A few of those folks are here tonight, along with Mayor Boczynski. Thank you very much for your patience in the back, for being here this evening. And just as a refresher, I can use Becca Kruger's data that she sent out to a few of us today. That kind of aligns with Dr. Shab's feedback that she gave me regarding communication. Follow Becca Kruger. She knows how to get short snippets out there. So here's what she said. 70 days, 72 constituents, almost $10.2 million raised to put into this application to make it a doable process that goes to the state. So that group has met its goal, the fundraising goal at the local level. And just a couple of reminders before I turn it over to Tanya and Keith Lund, that the Career Impact Academy facility, if this is approved by, if you approve the application going forward to the state, would be a facility owned by the school district and maintained by the school district. And secondly, the school board, the city school board, will serve as the government agency submitting the grant application. So, like I said in my cover memo, what you don't have is the full narrative of what the grant application looks like. And there's two reasons for that. One, it's not completely finalized yet. But number two, it also gives other communities and school districts an idea to take a look at what we're submitting, because we are competing with other school districts and other communities. So that is what I have for you, but who really has the important information is Tanya and Keith. And again, thank you for being here this evening. And Tanya, I will turn it over to you.
President Lund, President Shepard, and members of the Grand Forks School District and Grand Forks Air Force Base School District, thank you for your time and your commitment to the students in our schools. It is greatly appreciated. On behalf of the Career Impact Academy Steering Committee and my teammates that are here, we are excited to present to you our final application for review and approval. On November 8th, we presented a detailed breakdown of the grant application narratives for your review. That side deck is in your packets that was handed out. Tonight, the Career Impact Academy Steering Committee requests approval of our grant application for the CTE Capital Projects Grant. To ensure that grant applications align with our district's strategic plan, we developed a guiding document that ensures that the funding opportunities we pursue enhance our mission and vision. As we worked through this document, I believe the following three strategic areas are addressed with this grant. Number one, academic engagement strategies for student success. As part of the High Reliability School Framework, our strategic plan states that we will offer a school learning environment that encourages each student to engage in their own learning experience. The Career Impact Academy does just this. Students will have the opportunity for hands-on learning that fits their interests. When students have a love of learning and a desire to succeed, they're genuinely engaged in their school and in their education. We know student engagement is a leading indicator of academic success. The next area that we reviewed is really innovation and creativity. This part of the strategic plan states that we embrace change and establish flexible learning environments so that our organization remains relevant and responsive to contemporary and future student needs and interests. The Academy does just this. The Academy gives the district the ability to build a first-class facility and has overwhelming community support to meet the needs of our students and our region, both now and in the foreseeable future. The next area is resource management and long-term planning. As you've heard before, there has not been a capital investment like this in over 50 years by the state. This funding is coming to us through federal funding, through the state of North Dakota, through the American Rescue Plan because of a pandemic. This grant application makes it possible for the district to access an additional $10 million if we are successful. That is $20 million investment in our students that will provide equitable opportunities across our high schools. Number 4 you'll see on there is that to prepare a budget for facilities and deferred maintenance. Mr. Ripley reviewed our forecasted budget with you on November 8th, which also addressed that deferred maintenance for this building, further addressing our strategic plan to ensure the long-term viability of this facility. One more area that I wanted to cover tonight is, again, that governance model. The grant application includes a governance model for the Career Impact Academy. This school board will serve as the Career Impact Academy board and will inherit the powers and duties. To name a few of them, to supervise, manage, and control the Career Impact Academy, and to receive and administer any private, local, state, and federal funds. Why did I include these? I included this list to really provide confidence to the school board that you will be included in all of the decisions related to this facility going forward. Additionally, part of the governance model includes a provision that the Career Impact Academy will have a director to oversee the daily operations of the center. This director must meet the State Department credentialing requirements. Mr. Eric Ripley has been designated in the grant application as the director. Lastly, Mr. Scott Berge has been designated as the business manager for the center and noted that we will follow the district procedures and for funding requirements and also keeping funding separate for the building. I believe with the hard work and dedication of Mr. Ripley and Mr. Berge as the leaders of this academy, we can be confident in the long-term success of our center. This last slide, again, that I put up here just is a reminder of the 4 levels that we have in place to help us govern the center and really to continue building in our community. You can see here there's so many levels added to this center to ensure the long-term viability of this center. Now I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Lund from the Grand Forks Economic Development Center to give you an update on the fundraising aspect of our center.
All right. Well, good evening, President Lund, President Shepard, Superintendent Brenner, members of both boards. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Keith Lund. I'm president of the Grand Forks Region Economic Development Corporation. I was going to say maybe if you get the Herald alerts, this might be old news, but for anybody listening to Superintendent Brenner about 5 minutes ago, this is old news. But I am really pleased to be here this evening to repeat the good news. 3 political subdivisions, Grand Forks Public Schools, City of Grand Forks County. 2 civic organizations, Chamber of Commerce, Grand Forks Region Economic Development Corporation. 2 foundations, 4 individuals, and more than 60 businesses have come together to invest more than $10.2 million in the Grand Forks Career Impact Academy. I'm really proud of that. I did take a moment today to celebrate and reflect a little bit about how fortunate we are to live in a community and a region where these various groups, who don't always come together, have come together to really invest in the future of this region. So I'm really proud of that, and thank you for all your support. And I really want to extend my gratitude to all the folks who worked on this. You know, a lot of work went into this before we were able to announce that we met our fundraising goal of $10 million. We needed the political support, so you provided that, the city and the county, with your investments. We needed a site, so thanks to the City of Grand Forks for taking a leadership role and identifying the site and donating that to the project. We needed the programming, so Mr. Ripley, who's not here tonight, and many, many others that participated in that. And we needed to have a building design, and lots of folks participated in that as well. We really needed all that work to be done before we could sit across the table from anybody and ask them for anything, because they really needed to know what's in it for them. So you get a chance to hear from me from time to time. I happen to be involved in the fundraising, but I just want to share that there was so much work that went into this before we got to this point to celebrate the announcement that we're providing tonight. We had almost 50 volunteers, many of you in the room today, over 1,500 hours of time. This started in February. And so it's been a bit of a journey, pretty compressed actually, but it's been a little bit of time that we've been working on this. I really need to recognize two people. When you start mentioning people, you're always going to leave someone out. But I want to recognize your Director of Career and Technical Education, Eric Ripley, who really drove this from the education standpoint and the programming standpoint and really the facility standpoint with others. But I really think Eric led it. And I want to recognize Ms. Becca Kruber, the Workforce Development Manager for the Grand Forks Region Economic Development Corporation. She really organized our effort and made it possible for folks to go out and make the requests, gave us really the ammunition and the information that we really needed to make those requests. So I'm really pleased and proud of the whole effort. And Ms. Schleicher has been spending a lot of time in her office. You'll have her back anytime. But really, in terms of dedicating her time to this and preparing this grant application, it's been fantastic. As I mentioned, all this work's been done before we had a chance to sit across from any company. And speaking of that, September 13th was the first request we made, All True Health System. And what's important about that, and you kind of stole my thunder a little bit, Superintendent Brenner, that was 70 days ago. $10.2 million in just under 2.5 months. It's quite remarkable, actually. So I'm just really couldn't be prouder of the steering committee and all the volunteers that came together to make this possible. I couldn't be prouder of all the organizations that came together to invest in our future, invest in this opportunity. And quite frankly, couldn't be prouder to live in this region that I am today. So thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight and to share the wonderful news. And if I may, the mayor is here this evening and may want to say a word or two, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Please state your name and address and keep it under 3 minutes. No, you can have as long as you want.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lund, and I'm sorry, is it President Shepard? Is that, all right, and the two boards tonight. Geez, I would have got all nervous having two of you to talk in front of, but really tonight I just came here to say thank you. Times are tough financially, but looking to the future and being willing to take the risk and take this project on and this opportunity, being able to leverage private sector funds to help education is something that I don't think has happened in this community in a long time. And to do so with a hands-on learning environment that can be so fulfilling for kids, I think is just going to be a game changer in the community. I'm really excited to see where this project goes. I'm going to work hard and do all the back channel I can to make sure we get that grant application through for the full amount. But really, I just want to say thank you for your willingness, and we're going to have some tough decisions as a community in the future when it comes to schools. So any chance I can get to just tell you you've got my support in those decisions as we move forward. And thank you for this. The private sector and our political subdivisions all came together for this project, and they said yes, and they've said yes 10.2 million times so far. So hopefully that'll continue, and we keep fundraising and turn this into something great. So really, just here to say thank you. So thank you, everybody.
All right, and before I kind of open it up for you guys for deliberations and questions that you may have for me under the grant application, I just also want to extend my thank you for being a part of this committee. It has been an absolute amazing experience. If you would have told me 2.5 years ago we would be writing a $10 million grant, I would not have believed it.
I just meant for you to speak into the mic a little better.
It's been a long day.
You're a wanderer.
So I just want to, again, thank you guys for allowing us this opportunity. 2.5 years ago, I don't know that we would have been here trying to attempt a $10 million grant. We've had some success in the grant writing world. This has definitely been a project that is near and dear to my heart, just because it really does move our community. And so I will turn it over to you guys if you have any questions of me from the grant application standpoint that I can answer before you start deliberating.
Questions from board members, clarifying questions, comments? Go ahead, Jackie.
When it was proposed to have a grant writing position, I knew it would be a game changer, but didn't quite realize how much it would mean to us. So thank you for all of your work, not only just on this, but on so many things that have helped us stay afloat.
Thank you. It's been a privilege to have this opportunity to work with all of the great colleagues here in the Grand Forks Public Schools and just really keep moving our mission forward. And that's what we're here for. So.
Other clarifying questions? I got one for you. So say we end up fundraising $11 million and we get 100% return. What do we do with the extra million? Does that go into the deferred maintenance, or what happens with anything above the grant application amount?
To my knowledge, that has not been discussed. I do know that we have a phase 1 and a phase 2 plan where we actually have that budgeted out for phase 1 and phase 2. So if we are so lucky to have all 10 million plus the additional amounts raised, we would take that back to the steering committee to make those decisions, and then also with you guys as the governing board.
Thank you. Amber?
I just want to say, I think that this is a really great example of a collaborative effort. I think at times we come in at different times during a process of a project or some sort of initiative. And one of the things I heard from the very beginning was we did our research and we learned from other committees that have started this process that we need to bring a lot of the parties to the table sooner rather than later. And I think that just speaks to a great example of a collaborative effort between political subdivisions and the community. And I just hope that this spurs that from growing into greater projects and initiatives for our community for years to come. And for those of you that have worked so hard in 70 days, now you can go eat all of your stress and emotions for Thanksgiving.
Any further comments, questions? If not, the recommendation from administration is to approve the application. Doug, go ahead.
I'll move approval.
Do we have a second?
I second.
By Chris. Any further questions or comments? Go ahead, Doug.
Just a couple comments. One, I think this is a tremendous opportunity, and I've always felt that. I've always had some concerns about, from a financial perspective. And I still have those concerns, but this is just an opportunity that is too great for our students in this community to not take advantage of it. But I do want to caution the board, and so that from a financial perspective, this doesn't end once we get approved grant. There's going to have to be further lobbying of the state because there's going to be more demand for those staffing and benefit dollars. And if the legislature doesn't increase that pot, we're not going to get the anticipated percentages that are in law today or in the program today. And also, deferred maintenance is still an issue in my mind. And I do recommend that at some point in time when this building comes online, that this board designate and set aside money for deferred maintenance out of our building fund. Now, I know that's going to seem like a weird request when we have such demand for those dollars today, but if we don't start doing that, all we're going to do is pass that problem on to a future board 25, 30 years from now. So those are just the two cautions I have, but I wholeheartedly endorse and support this, and I think it will be great for our community when it is up and fully running.
Thank you. Any further comments? I would echo Doug's comments. I mean, where can you invest $1.5 million and get $18.5 million back? Anybody in the financial world would love that, I think so. Seeing no other questions or comments, assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you all. Wonderful, wonderful work. Well, let's move on to item C, which is the Smart Restart update, Dr. Brenner, and it's on electronic pages 51 through 63.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. I'm going to look at my hard copy, so if you'll advance those, appreciate that very much. In my memo to all of you, you know, one of the things that I didn't say is, you know, before we even get to our recommendation, before we get to a decision, I referenced the last 21 months have been quite a journey for all of us. Not only all of us around the table, everybody in the classroom, all of our support staff, our parent community, and our broader community at large. It's been, you know, some of you know this, some of you don't. I used to officiate basketball and worked my way to the college level and got to work some pretty competitive rivalry games. And when you're in that environment, the emotion is high. But after an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes, you can leave, and you can leave that behind you. I think what we've all learned through this pandemic is emotions can run at various levels at very different times. People have had different perspectives, different opinions, some scientific, some perhaps not. But nonetheless, it's put all of us at times in the crosshairs of making decisions. So there hasn't been one easy decision during COVID-19. There hasn't been a decision that's been universally accepted where you felt like 100% of the people agreed. When decisions were made, you feel like, at least I have felt like half the gym has stood up and applauded, and the other half of the gym has called my mother names. That's what we used to say in the officiating world. So that was supposed to be a joke, but that didn't go over very well. But nonetheless, on to the presentation. I just wanted to make sure that I have felt what all of you have felt, and this has been a really challenging time at the classroom level as it relates to some of the mitigation procedures that we have put in place. But what I'm proud of is we are one of a few school districts, and you heard me say this before, where we had all of our students in session last year, other than the 17 days where we went to remote learning. We moved all of our athletic and co-curricular activities through the end of their seasons, through tournament time. This year, we started with a masking requirement after that was relaxed a bit over the summer. But once we got into August and saw some of the spikes creeping up at our campuses, this board, along with administrative recommendation, to go to a masking requirement was the right thing to do at that time. So with that, if we could just go to the preamble. Several of these slides are slides that you saw back on August 20th when you helped make that decision for a masking requirement. So I'm using these as a refresher about where we've been. This isn't necessarily where we're at today. I'll go to the second bullet. Most of the COVID-19 mitigation efforts have been employed with the exception of physical distancing in places where we have not been able to do that. Principals, teachers, and support staff have provided reminders to students relative to masking when applicable, which at some levels is constant. I was able to be at Red River last week during 3 hallway passing times, and just watching staff remind kids, I mean, they could have had a recording, mask above your nose, mask above your nose, mask above your nose. And just that kind of fatigue, emotional fatigue that puts on our teaching staff. And in some cases, you know, there have been some isolated incidents where we've had some students really not want to comply. And then a teacher has to make a decision. Do I teach for the next 52 minutes and ignore that? Or do I take that on and lose this instructional period? So that's what some of our staff have been facing. Enforcing the masking requirements during indoor athletic events has been challenging and frustrating for those responsible to monitor, i.e. our high school leadership teams, our activity directors at the building level. And they've been put into some situations where police officers don't even want to be in those situations. So that has been a challenge. If you go to the next slide, please, Dr. Lewis. This would be our COVID data from the first 12 weeks of school. And you know, what you'll see in the blue is the staff positive, and in the yellow is the staff close contacts, and red is student positive, and then the green student close contacts. We've really kept these numbers collectively when you When you consolidate the staff and student numbers, most weeks it was about 25 or 26 positive cases. We just had a little uptick last week where we were actually up to 40. But when I compare that to last year at this very same time, again, so let's just use 40 positives from last week and 115 close contacts. Last year, 125 positive cases and 796 close contacts. So those 796 students were quarantining. And academically, it was a challenging time for them. So I just thought I'd share that comparison for you. So we've done well in this environment, keeping masks on. Next slide, please. The present building and facilities mitigation, we've really been able to upgrade some of our air quality thanks to some ESSER dollars and thanks to Chris Arnold and his staff, working on fresh air distribution. Masks have been provided for everybody, plexiglass at workstations, hand sanitizers everywhere. Again, the 3-foot bubble where it was attainable. Regular sanitation of high-touch, high-traffic areas, although we've learned a little bit more about tabletops. When I think about the first week of school of the 2020-21 school year, I think we went through $20,000 worth of tabletop wipes in the first week of school. So, but we've learned a little bit more about how much of that we have to do, and we're certainly still recommending for people to stay home when they're sick. Next slide, please. As far as breakfast and lunch, this probably works a little bit better at the elementary level where students eat in pods or they eat at numbered tables. At least that's what I see at my son's school. And administrators continue to have seating charts so we can contact trace when applicable. And we try to physical distance whenever we can. And we have not had visitors in for breakfast or lunch, i.e. parents, basically, this school year. Next slide, please. So the community is open. Why mask? Examples that we hear of often, at least my email inbox fills up pretty regularly after a concert at the Alaris Center, after 2 nights at the Ralph Engelstad Arena, watching the Fighting Hawks play hockey. Very few masks, if you can even find any. I think we're better with ear coverings in the Ralph than we are with masks. That, again, was a little bit of humor. Students are still congregating outside of school. We know that. High percentage of teachers, and this goes back to the GFEA survey that was done prior to the school year starting. A majority of them would have preferred to have masks recommended rather than masks required. We know through public health data that 64% of our staff have been vaccinated, and about 48% of our 12 to 17-year-olds have been vaccinated. And now, not so much breaking news anymore, but as of November 8th, our 5 to 11-year-olds are eligible for the vaccine, which is a game changer in our recommendation when we get to the final slide. I did ask Altru today if they have enough vaccine available for all of our 5 to 11-year-olds, because that was a question that was asked, and they do. They have ample supply. So let's go to the next slide, please. Our present quarantining guidelines: if mask to mask, there's been no quarantining. If mask to no mask, we must quarantine. If the vaccination is confirmed, no quarantining, yet that person needed to monitor for symptoms. We've done some rapid testing at the building level, but we've also encouraged parents to take kids to the Fritz Pollard HBC Center over at UND. And I know I've used that on a regular basis, and it's really slick to go over there at 7:15 in the morning and have a rapid test and get your results back in 20 minutes. That's been just a fantastic community partnership. Next slide, please. Again, this is old information from our August 20th presentation. Because of the masking requirement, we knew we'd have students who would miss less class instructional time because they wouldn't have to quarantine. Learning loss is something that we've certainly been paying attention to since the pandemic arrived. Family work schedules were impacted when parents needed to stay home. Again, this is August 20th, but I think we're in a new day at this time. And teachers were really stretched to manage long-term student absences and learning needs. And then this also affected our own staff who had to stay home. Either they were quarantining or they were quarantining with their own child or children. Next slide, please. Thank you, Dr. Lewis. What we've been following all along in our Smart Restart weekly meetings, that includes 22 to 24 people. 4 of those people are public health officials, and Sean McBride, epidemiologist with Grand Forks County, is here this evening to help with any questions that you might have that would be applicable to his wheelhouse. And what we said at that time was we would pivot and we would move away from masks required if one of these measures were triggered. Grand Forks County risk rate would go to the green for 10 consecutive days. That simply isn't happening. We've been in the orange for a long time, and the transmission rate continues to be high. The second bullet was if the transmission rate would be in the low to moderate level, and vaccination rates hit herd immunity status, which might allow us to shift sooner as well. Next slide, please. I'll skip over the first bullet because I already said that. The second bullet, same thing. And our committee has compared our local internal school district COVID data to other school districts in the county. And this would be a good time to just pass around what Mr. McBride had shared with me. Actually, he shared this with our committee a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him if he would be able to provide this again. And what you're going to see is a slide comparing Grand Forks public school students, which is about half of the students in the rest of Grand Forks County. We have a masking requirement. All the other school districts either don't have a masking requirement or they have masks recommended. And Sean, would you want to comment on this slide at all, or do you want me to keep right on going?
I think there's an explanation at the top, kind of just outlined.
So, pretty good piece of data would be the bullet in the middle of the page. Case rates for rural Grand Forks County children were roughly twice the case rate of Grand Forks city cases. And the data suggests rural schools with less rigorous mitigation experienced in school transmission when compared to what we were doing. Now that sounds like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, but we just want to be fully transparent that certainly public health would advocate that we continue to have a mask requirement based on CDC guidelines. Which is one of the reasons why I wanted to make sure Sean was here this evening as well to balance this conversation if it doesn't feel balanced. So with that, if you would go to page 60, our next slide. That's our recommendation slide. So while we have not met the criteria originally set forth by the committee, which was supported by the school board, and you can see, I just cut and paste that from a previous slide, the Smart Restart Committee recommends, and you can go to the next slide, effective November 23rd, which is tomorrow, after-school activities such as athletics and fine arts performances where we have audience members or fans in the stands, masks would be recommended. Masks, however, would still be required for Encore, which is our after-school academic program for applicable students. And then effective January 17th, that puts us about 2 weeks after the holiday break when everybody returns, that masks would be recommended for K-12 students and employees in all school-owned or leased facilities during the instructional day. Masks would be highly recommended for staff working with Head Start and early childhood special education students. And just a bit of a sidebar there, we're working through some of the federal guidelines as it relates to Head Start. The second bullet, mask would be required for programs that include immunocompromised students or employees. So there could be a situation where we have, let's just say, a medically compromised teacher, and there are 150 students who move through that teacher's classroom. Out of respect for that person's health, we would ask students to mask up during that one period of the day. And we don't think that's too much to ask to care for another fellow human being. Mask requirements would still be in place on school buses, city buses, and activity buses. That's following federal guidelines. And then mask requirements may be reinstated if our data takes a turn for the worse. So down on the bottom third of that slide, in part, these recommendations are being made due to the eligibility of students 5 to 11 to receive the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccination. As I said earlier, waiting until after the December holiday break will provide time for interested families to have their students fully immunized. And unless there's a valid contraindication or a medical reason, it's highly recommended that all individuals 5 years of age and older receive the COVID-19 vaccination series. And that would come from CDC. That's not necessarily the superintendent advocating for that. Parents have a choice in that layer of protection. So it's the SMART Restarts recommendation, or administrative recommendation is to approve the SMART Restarts Committee's recommendation found on this slide. And I'm sure there'll be some conversation.
I'm sure. Clarifying questions, comments from board members. Bill?
Just since I was the one that asked to put this on the agenda, I'll start. I do agree with this recommendation. The one thing I would like to see possibly changed is 9 through 12-year-olds with a high school level to possibly go to a mass recommendation only starting the second semester. They've had ample time to have their children vaccinated. They do have a large number of kids that are vaccinated. The younger kids are just started just last week or so. I think if you compare our districts with districts around us, would be an ask why. And I think the one point, especially in the high school area, if you talk to principals or teachers, they are battling that every day. They're battling kids not wearing their mask, and this would give them an opportunity to stop that battle.
Thank you. Other clarifying questions, comments? Really? Okay. Jackie, thank you.
It says mask requirement would be reinstated if COVID data dictated so. Have we discussed about what the recommendations for return to masking would be if this recommendation were to go through?
We would go back to our chart, our points of consideration chart, and likely just use the surgical approach. If we have an outbreak in a classroom, we would deal with it at the classroom level, at the school level, at the district level. So we do have that in place that we can revert back to.
Cynthia?
Well, I'll ask a follow-up to that, because that to me just doesn't make sense. If you go to a previous slide and you see that masking will be recommended but not required when GF County risk rate is in the green for 10 consecutive days, transmission rate is in the low to moderate level, and right now, as of today, the email that we get every day from the county, Grand Forks County is currently at high transmission level, 352.77 cases per 100K in the past 7 days. CDC recommends vaccination, masking for unvaccinated individuals, and masking in indoor public spaces for vaccinated individuals, with the county being still at high transmission rate. I don't think that these, I mean, it just doesn't gel with me in terms of when we would go to requirement if we're not listening to these guidelines.
We'll use our own internal data, what's happening at our buildings. That would be the pivot for us.
Other questions, comments? Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. President. To publicly state, I received a number of emails, and I had said in August that I supported whatever the Department of Health, the county, provided to us. I also replied to a number of people in my emails, as the 5 to 11-year-olds are now being able to be vaccinated as a choice for their families, that I believe with that option being on the table for families, that I would certainly endorse what's being provided. And Mr. Palmasino, hearing what you're saying certainly would make sense. I actually had asked the question about possibly going when we come back from the new year, but it was explained to me by one senior leadership that they want to make sure that that vaccination has time to build the immunities in the body. So I can certainly live with the 17th, yet I think a reconsideration for the 9 to 12, because they have had sufficient amount of time to be vaccinated as a choice by their parents.
Further questions, comments? Jackie?
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that we're deciding to be date-driven instead of data-driven. And I have a real concern about that because we decided here's where the data should be, here's where our transmission rate should be, here's where it looks like a safe return to maybe, allowing some flexibility with masking. And now we're saying, well, that data doesn't really matter, we're kind of all tired, gosh, it's exhausting telling kids to put masks on, so let's just pick a date, right? That, to me, undermines the decisions we've made as a board up until this point. This document here clearly shows that other schools who are going through the same time frame as us are having many more cases than us because they do not require masking, because they do not do internal contact tracing, because they allow students to return home even if they have, in some cases, a household member positive in the home. And I've been quite proud of the work that we've done. And the reason we're at where we're at, I believe, is because we have followed these recommendations. Now, we can say vaccines are a possibility, but on, I guess it's no, maybe some of my board members don't know from the Air Force Base, but I do contact tracing every day, 8 hours a day. And so I get to see very much firsthand the spectrum of people that do become impacted by COVID-19. Not all people have the finances, the education, the English language parent, there's tons of barriers to people getting vaccinated right away. And I feel like kind of putting some of those most vulnerable people and saying now we're removing this great preventative strategy we have in place for you because some people are tired and they think, well, you've had enough time, is really undermining what public education is about and public health is about. Public education is about encompassing people who are the most vulnerable, right? People can't afford a can't afford education and things. That's where historically we want to educate everybody. And I think people deserve to be protected as long as possible. Because not everybody will be able to get an appointment today or tomorrow or this week, and not everybody will understand what that means for their children. Some people need time. Some high schoolers do not have the choice to get vaccinated because of their parents. And I think we should protect them. And I think we should at least be data-driven. Because I do worry that if we do this, our quarantine numbers are going to go up, education is going to be impacted, and some of our most at-risk vulnerable students are going to be impacted by this more severely. I do have a question well, actually, I'm going to pause there and get my question together before I spit it out. So I'll stop there.
We'll get back to you. Further questions or comments? Go ahead, Doug.
Just one question related to the school activities portion of it. I had a couple of emails that kind of talked about what I gathered was almost more like classroom type stuff, but they were talking about activity, chorus, band, and some of those kind of things. And how much does that really impact like K through 5 or 6 through 8? I understand it really probably impacts 9 through 12 more, but what is the impact on K through 5 by taking away that masking requirement?
I think that's a really good question. We do have things like intramurals, chorus, those pieces for primarily more of our 4th and 5th graders, but we do have those in our buildings as well. So again, I think it comes down to that example too of fans in the stands. So for intramurals and chorus, aside from like the concert for chorus, we wouldn't have fans in the stands there, and it's right after the instructional day. It's all the students from that school. It's optional, but again, it's an extension of the instructional day, but it does happen at the elementary level.
Further questions, comments? Go ahead, Amber.
So that we were given what was currently being done and what we will move to. The visitor policy, will that remain the same as it is current?
We have a few more details to work out. So we wouldn't be ready to say visitors tomorrow, for lunch and breakfast. So we still have to work out some of those. That's a very good question.
And then, can you describe, Dr. Brenner, what we're currently doing for contact tracing and quarantining, and then what we would move to?
Does anybody want to take the contact tracing question, where we're at? Because I know this has been a heavy conversation with the committee.
Yeah, I can take that. I'll take what we have done for the duration of the year is employed contact tracing protocols that were very similar to last year, meaning if we were aware of a positive case in a classroom, our building administrators pulled seating charts, verified mask integrity, for lack of a better word, looked at lunch dynamics, after-school activities dynamics, sent out a plethora of letters from you were a masked close contact, here's your recommendations, you're an unmasked close contact. It was, it has taken an awful lot of time and has really strained the administrators' ability to do their jobs, quite honestly, the rest of their jobs. Yes, part of their job is keeping kids safe. That's how we've justified it. What's suffered has been the instructional leadership, the work and the collaboration with kids and teachers and providing that feedback and all the other operations that are central to our mission. And so just recently, we have, recently being, I think it was last week, forgive me for not knowing which date, I think it was last Monday, we allowed administrators to go the route of more similar to what public health does, kind of mirror those practices where we call a student down, ask them to identify their close contacts, and then alert those families, period, instead of going through all those layers of verification and all those additional steps in the process just to help them get some time back. We felt that it made sense to mirror the practices that were primarily in place in the community. And yes, we have access and can go above and beyond, but at the same time, what we found from our internal data is that for all of the kids that we asked to stay home on quarantine because they were considered close contacts, 2 of those cases, and you saw the hundreds of numbers in the charts, 2 of those cases turned positive. That was the only evidence that we had internally, and I think that actually mirrors quite a bit of what happened in the community as well, is that we just weren't seeing the next layer of infection rate, for lack of a better word. So we let go of that practice recently.
So just to clarify, we're not doing the contact tracing internally anymore?
We are contact tracing, but we're not verifying like all of the contacts within the classrooms. We're just talking to the student about their own identified close contacts. That mirrors what public health does. So if I was a positive person, they'd call me, ask who my close contacts were by the definition, and then I think in that instance, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sean, ask me to alert those that I would consider a close contact. We went the extra step and we're alerting families that were identified internally.
So along with that, would you require, in our current practice or what we've been done, were we requiring close contacts to quarantine? And moving forward, will we require close contacts to quarantine?
That would just move to recommended, which aligns with the language of the CDC guidelines.
Another question I have is the airbase. As we talk about the communication and same practices, does the airbase currently have a requirement for masking within their buildings, or within their spaces?
I can kind of speak on that, and Colonel Curry, please feel free to add anything. The base currently, the school itself follows the district policy. So Twining is masked. As for on base, we are to wear masks when we go into any Department of Defense building. So anytime we shop at our commissary, the BX, we go to work, we are fully masked right now. I will like to touch, though, that while this debate does go on back and forth, and I'm sure a lot of us can agree that there are pros and cons to each side, I would just like to say and applaud that the district, that the base has fully supported you guys, and thank you for that. You know, we do see children, as we talked about, yes, they are masked in schools, but especially on the base, we are a close community. And the children there do play without mask outside of school and are around each other all the time. And so moving forward, I see that really, I guess that this recommendation, I agree with it because while the county is in orange and we have all these other data points, we do kind of have to look at the reality is that we are going to concerts, we are playing outside, we are going to Target and other places, a lot of the times unmasked. But anyways, I know that was more than your question, but if you have any other questions, I know Curry can help out.
So, so I was sitting there thinking about this one. So for every other entity on my installation, they're going to wear a mask. So this will be unique if you take this away. Those kids will be the only people in any building without their mask. Am I right? So that will be different. But if they had to go to school and they wore their mask, they'd be the only school like that too. So you guys have an interesting dynamic with respect to how you go about doing that. For us, within the Air Force, I mean, I just went back on the same website that you guys are referencing from a CDC perspective. I told my commanders today, don't expect to take your mask off for probably 3 or 4 months because the data is not going to change here in Grand Forks unless we have something dramatically change in the community from that standpoint. So we're going to be wearing our masks on installation. Even though on installation, our percentage is probably a lot lower because 96% of active duty are vaccinated, and then my civilians will probably be over 90 here in the next week too. That's probably one of the greater mitigators. But more broadly speaking, and I know that it's a little bit more challenging probably for you to do this, but I don't know. We speak more broadly on our base about comprehensive fitness. So these are 2 things that we use to mitigate, a vaccination and a mask. But I talk to them about eating right and using their church and going to the gym, all those comprehensive fitness pieces that those play a factor too with respect to mitigating COVID. So just a little bit of insight with respect to what we have going on.
Colonel Curry, can I ask a follow-up? It is the CDC, the Child Development Center and the Youth Center, are they masked as well?
Yep.
Over 2 years old?
Is it 2 or 3?
2. It's 2.
2.
And those will remain?
Absolutely. I mean, that's a federal building,
Yeah.
so there's no deviation from that. The guidance for me, from my installation perspective, you would think I'd have more ability in this one. 0. It's you have to go below that threshold down to meet the transmissivity threshold. I have no leeway on that. So similar to what you're talking about with respect to, that's just the way it is for us.
Thank you. Further clarifying questions, Jackie?
Gosh, I stink at this today. I remembered my questions, or I have a better grasp on them for our public health person. And then I also wanted to just comment, I've heard a number of times, well, we're doing other things. I've heard it from people in the public too, you know, we're going to Shields, we're going to Target, we're going to concerts. You know, I want to remind people that when we're looking at the science, It's about the number of exposures and how your risk is up. So if I'm a student and I go to a class of 20 people and I spend my time with those 20 people and we're all masked, and my family says, hey, our transmission rates are high in the community, we're not going to concerts. We're not going to play with kids other than maybe your 2 or 3 that you're allowed. That child has virtually, right, very minimal exposure. Now for the child who is that child and doesn't do those community things, and we lift that mask mandate, which I believe or recommend is basically saying there is no masking. We have to assume that. Then now that child has 20 exposures, and whoever those people and their risks, basic network theory, right? So if we say just because the city's doing this, maybe we should, because it doesn't really matter. Well, for some people, I think it really does, because their number of exposures is going to go up. My high schooler, number of exposures, going to go way up with 8 classes a day, right? Because we are one of those families that do not go to concerts with lots of people. We wear our masks when we go out in public. We do those sorts of things. So I guess kind of piggybacking off of what I'm saying, can you maybe let us know, one, what the household transmission rate is? We've heard a little bit about close contact transmission being pretty low within the school. And maybe you don't know specifically for our school district, but just in general even. And then also, at what point are we projecting, if we know kind of where our vaccination rates will be high enough based on what we initially wanted to do in terms of being enough that we could maybe remove this, being that quote unquote what we hear about herd immunity, whatever that means, right?
There you go, got the mic. So I'll do my best to answer the question regarding household transmission rates. Unfortunately, with our case data in North Dakota and Grand Forks County, we're not able to track outcomes. And this is not an ideal situation, but it's due to the caseload that we have. We're not able to enter the data to track the outcomes for contacts, so we don't have locally available data. There have been studies that have evaluated transmission rates in various settings. There was a recent study that evaluated transmission rates at, I think it was a gymnastics tournament type of a thing, and they were noting about 20% of exposures resulted in a case. There have been some studies evaluating household transmission attack rates, and those were as high as 50% in a household, and these are assessments. The gymnastics one was when Delta was transmitting. The other household study didn't assess Delta, and so we can assume that those attack rates are probably higher with the Delta transmissibility. And then the second part of your question, when we might reach vaccination levels that we could presume that basically we wouldn't be subject to case surges or self-sustaining outbreaks type of a thing in a pandemic cycle. Right now, I can't really say when we would have that happen. We've had a long period of time for adolescents to reach what Grand Forks County has outlined has been a 60% level of vaccination to reach a herd immunity. That was used based on the best available data, which was pre-Delta, and so when you have an illness that is more transmissible, that's generally going to push up the level of vaccination coverage you're going to need. So I would anticipate that we would need higher than 60% likely. And again, this is speculation because we don't have the studies evaluating it well enough for Delta. 70 to 80% is likely, and I just don't see that type of uptake happening anytime soon within our student population. We're creeping up there with with Grand Forks County, but it's taking some time.
So would you say that the CDC transmission rate would be a good measure of what's going on here in Grand Forks, or should we be looking at some other data when we're looking at, because I'm being very loud and clear that I think we should be data-driven and not date-driven. So if we were to do that, what would you think would be better if CDC is not good enough, or?
Grand Forks Public Health has advocated for using that health officer dashboard to make decisions as far as what mitigation measures are appropriate. So that would be something that we would advocate for is tying it to that health officer dashboard that takes into account many different measures related to COVID-19.
Further questions, comments? Go ahead, Jackie.
Specifically said this, but we're looking at after-school activities as kind of separate of the masking issue, right? So after-school activities, let's say that we still are going with masking as required. I'm seeing this after-school activity as more of an enforcement issue, I think. And so would we still require that then for those people who are staffed and our students? Because I see it as a real issue if my child is going to school all day and being policed on their mask and then goes to a choir concert and all of a sudden it's, do whatever you want. I would see that would become a higher enforcement issue during the day because there'd be missed messages, but.
I just want to make sure I understand the question. So if we have fine arts performance after school, then we would not expect our students to be masked, or audience members as well.
If I may add to that, one of the differences there is that it's not a compulsory thing, and that audience members and what have you can spread out and protect themselves as much as they want in that sort of environment. And it is an enforcement thing, but the reality is we've had this requirement in place, and our teachers and our administrators have done a heck of a job trying to enforce it. But if you go to any of our games, quite honestly, it feels like a facade, because the kids do this and then yell. And we didn't ask our administrators to try to enforce with the adults, and our local adults as well as our visiting adults. Very few of them are masking. What you do see is that they go and they huddle together with their families and their friends that they probably commune with outside of the setting. So there's some solace in that, but it really feels like more of a facade than an actual policy that has any integrity behind it.
Other thoughts? I'll throw my 2 cents in. And I'll actually take my school board hat off and probably put my pediatrician hat on more than anything. I've sat here for over a year now listening to some great debates, some great discussion, some great data, but also a lot of garbage, as we all know. And you can manipulate data however you want, as I've said multiple times before, and make the argument that you want to. It gets down to risk mitigation. If you want zero risk for COVID, then you better get to the top of Denali in Alaska and make sure no other people come up and do that. So we're talking about risk mitigation, trying to reduce the risk as much as possible. Masking being one of them, and there's no question in my mind masking works, but vaccinations, physical distancing, staying home when you're sick, all those things, they're all risk mitigation. And we do that with all sorts of things. When I go home tonight, I'm going to mitigate my risk of getting killed in a car accident because I'll probably drive the speed limit. Hopefully I won't use my cell phone. Hopefully I'll pay attention to the other person in case they're driving wild. It's all about risk mitigation. And not to burst anybody's bubble, but it's already been proven that vaccination is not going to eliminate this pandemic. It certainly modifies it. But it doesn't eliminate it. People who are vaccinated are getting COVID and they're getting sick. Some of them are dying, but not many. But what it does, it makes you less sick and less likely to spread and stuff. So it's not going to eliminate it. And when we look at the future of COVID, Sean doesn't know what's going to happen in a year or two. I don't know what's going to happen in a year or two. But we can guess. And I can guess that COVID's not going to go away like SARS did in the early 2000s with the previous variant. That I think this is probably going to stay, and we're going to end up with low-level COVID probably like we do flu. That's just my guess. I'm not going to be any right or wrong than anybody else. I think with being allowed to vaccinate kids, that adds a new layer of mitigation. So I'm actually in support of this, the way it's been described. But I also think we do have to watch, because if all of a sudden the cases are going back up, we might have to look at that, because as Jackie and Cynthia both point out, the numbers are higher in the rural school districts than they are here. We don't know if it's just masking. It could be something else. Nobody did a controlled study, but you have to guess that probably had some effect on that. But I'm certainly in favor of this. I don't think the reason we do this is just because everybody's tired of masks. I think we do have good reasons to do it, and one of them is being that we now have vaccination that's available for everybody 5 and above, and that makes a difference as far as I'm concerned. Are we going to get the student population vaccinated enough to have herd immunity? Well, first of all, you got to define herd immunity. Even the nation experts at the beginning talked about 60%. And then all of a sudden they were saying 70. Now they're saying 80, maybe 90. It depends upon the transmissibility of the infectious agent. So I don't think we're going to get there. Certainly not with society divided the way it is right now. We aren't even going to get there with adults probably. And you know, I'm in the high risk. I'm old. I got diabetes. And I take care of sick kids with COVID all the time. So I'm actually at much more risk than any kid in school practically. That's where we need to look at. So I'm in favor of doing this like we've talked about before. Nothing with COVID is written in granite. It's all written in pretty soft limestone. And 3 weeks from now, 3 months from now, 3 years from now, it may very well look different. So I'm in favor of this based on what has come out of the Smart Restart Committee. Any further thoughts? Go ahead, Jackie.
I think having a vaccine option is different than having vaccine numbers. That's first and foremost. If we do move ahead with this, I really worry about recommending contact tracing. I think we need to at least have minimal unmasked contact tracing occurring in our schools. And I don't know where that's wiggling out on what you explained, Catherine, but because if we're not tracking that data, how do we know if our numbers are going up? I mean, we don't know. If we're not doing the contact tracing, we don't know. And what we do know is public health is not set up at this time to be putting those numbers together for us. And so we need to have some measure internally on tracking what's going on there aside from just absentee rates. So I think I guess I would really recommend that we're at least at the minimum doing internal unmasked contact tracing, you know, if people are in a gym class unmasked, or if they're eating lunch unmasked, or something along those lines.
Catherine, do you have a response for that?
I do. It's not a great response depending on what side you look at it, but the difficulty with that would be, I think more so at the secondary level than the elementary level. When you talk about kids changing classes 8 different times during the course of the day and being in lunch and being after school activity and that sort of thing. When you think about the logistics of sending out all of those notifications to families and the pull on the staff that would be required to do that, it's a pretty heavy lift. It really is. Our many of the large districts across the state have not embarked in any of those activities throughout the course of time. Throughout the course of the school year, and their numbers that they have reported really mirror ours. I think Dr. Brenner has some better data around that. Whether or not it's because they're unreported is the big question, right? So, especially at the secondary level, I think those logistics would be really difficult to manage.
Because I'm just wondering, how do we know if it's making an impact if we're not notifying kids that they're close contacts? Do you know what I'm saying? How are we really able to do that? I guess I'm just trying to wrap my mind around how are we able to connect the dots. It's very similar to when I hear, I get some member of the public say to me, well, we had this big concert and we didn't see any numbers from that. Well, we don't know because we're not tracking it. We are no longer, as contact tracers, saying, hey, did you go to the whatever concert 2 weeks ago? We're not asking people those questions. So if we don't know, then how do we know? So I really worry about some of that. And I understand and I want to respect the load on staff because that's something that we should be doing as a district and as a board. However, our numbers are much less than they were this time last year, and we were doing intensive contact tracing last year. And so I do wonder if there's still some room just to continue it just a little longer to ensure that that's something that is accurate, that our efforts are doing what they're saying.
Not to make you feel any worse, Jackie, but I can tell you in talking to my other colleagues that take care of kids in town, now the latest trend I'm seeing, and I've seen it lots of times, is parents aren't even going to the doctor because they don't want to be tested because they don't want their kid out of school for 10 to 14 days. And so we've got disease running around that we don't know of, and over time, I think that's only going to get worse with parents that are just going to say, well, Johnny, just don't tell them that you were really sick or things like that. Plus, there's also such overlap. I mean, this fall, I went nuts because half the kids either had COVID or some other virus, the other half had allergies, and they all got the same symptoms. And so I mean, unfortunately, it's out there. So go ahead, Bill.
No, I'm just ready to make a motion. But I'd like to ask Dr. Brenner, if we did excluded high school or moved up high school, would that be a big hassle in getting your communications out to the schools?
I would ask just for a little more time so we can communicate that out, even if you could make that recommendation for next Monday.
No, I was recommending high school started the second semester, January 3rd.
That helps, thank you.
That's what. Okay, then I'll make a recommendation that we follow the administrative recommendation for the Smart Restart Committee, with the only change is that the high school students would be recommended, their masks be recommended only for 9 through 12 grades, and then K through 8 would be, or that date would be January 3rd, and then the K through 8 date would be January 17th.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second by Chris. Further discussions, thoughts, questions, comments, rumbling? Doug?
I guess I think consistency across the district would be more important. It's a 2-week period, so I think it would be better to be more consistent by having the same date for all K through 12. So I would move an amendment to change that to January 17th for all K through 12.
We have a motion for an amendment. Do we have a second? Second by Amber. Now let's just discuss the amendment, which is Doug's motion. Further questions about that?
I agree that just general communication consistency is important, and I certainly understand the want and need to start on a semester timeline and come back to school fresh, but I just think if this is the route we're going, it's going to be easier to communicate with families on a consistent timeline, families and staff.
Further questions, comments? Doug, I'm looking to you because you're my Robert's Rules kind of guy, so we would vote on the amendment first, and then if that passed, we'd vote on the original, okay? Any further thoughts? So the motion on the floor is to amend the original motion and make it consistently January 17th, K through 12. Assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign?
Aye.
Okay.
Manley.
No.
Mikula is absent. Palmasino. Shab. Carpenter. Douthit.
Nay.
Flynn.
Aye.
Hassett.
Aye.
Lund.
Aye.
5 yes, 3 no, 1 absent.
So back to the original motion, which has now been amended to actually go back to the actual recommendations from the Smart Restart Committee. Do we have further discussion on that motion? Go ahead, Jackie.
I just noticed that contact tracing is not part of the motion, and so I would trust that that may be taken back to the Restart Committee and be brought back to the board if there's a significant change? Or should we, I'm not sure how to handle it because it's not exactly a part of what's proposed here.
Well, I think the board can do what it's want. My personal thought would be that let administration do the administering and stuff, but that would be my thought.
The plan is to still meet weekly with the Smart Restart Committee, I'm assuming, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Until like the end of time, basically. Like, I mean, there's really no deadline, right? Like you're just, okay.
Till Sean tells us we don't have to meet anymore. So, further questions or comments about the motion? Seeing none, the motion is to adopt the recommendations that came from the Smart Restart Committee. Let's just call for a roll vote. I don't think we'll be unanimous.
Flynn,
Aye.
Hassett. Manley,
Aye.
Mikula absent, Palmasino,
Aye.
Shab,
No.
Carpenter. Yes. Douthit,
Aye.
Lund,
Yes.
6 yes, 2 no, 1 absent.
Thank you all. And Sean, thank you for spending your whole evening with us. You're free to go or you're free to stay, whichever you prefer. Thank you. Let's move on to item 7D, which is approval of firm to provide guaranteed energy savings performances. Mr. Arnold, thank you for being here.
Good evening, both boards. This is Chris Arnold, Director of Buildings and Grounds. Page 64 of 103 in the Grand Forks District 1 packet, presenting forth the results of the Energy Savings Performance Contract. This is very similar to the exercise that we did approximately 1 year ago. The district administration established a selection committee, completed an invitation for bid, conducted a site visit with 4 potential firms, and performed an initial evaluation of the proposals and conducted interviews with 3 responses. We had, as I said, we had 3 firms submit bids. We actually had 4 firms come on site and tour 4 of our buildings in the district. After reviewing the 3 submissions, we interviewed them, and we recommend the approval of ICS Consultants to provide us a vehicle to establish FIMs, which are facility improvement measures as it relates to the energy world. These projects, this is by no means a contract. This is just giving the district administration the ability to work with this vendor to identify those FIMs and then bring them back in a form of a formal contract. Any questions?
Questions for Mr. Arnold?
Yes, Amber.
Can you, I have 2 questions. Can you describe the terms of the contract, just briefly, the cliff notes of what that would look like, and then the basis for calculating the savings?
Okay, so the terms of the contract are not yet, there's no contract being agreed upon today. This is just basically the, allows me to begin working with this firm to establish what FIMs we are going to do. And a FIM would be like replacing a light fixture with an LED, you know, going from fluorescent to LED. The contract will be driven by that. So this will allow the vendor to come in and do an assessment, a complete assessment across the school district and also out at Twining out at the Air Force Base. And that will kind of grow the contract. And then the vehicle for funding, this is a unique setup within the North Dakota Century Code. These projects that are identified have to be self-funding, meaning they must return investment in less than 15 years, I think is correct, Scott, yeah. 15 years, so meaning the project must self-generate or have another project self-generate money to repay it. And it isn't necessarily just a boiler or an air handler or a light fixture. It can equate to a skylight. You know, we look at the big skylight over at Central High School. This might be our vehicle to, you know, to address that. So our goal is not only to help the district become more efficient, but also to help lower that deferred maintenance list that we all know and love so much.
Thank you.
Further clarifying questions, comments? If not, the administrative recommendation is to approve not this contract, but with this working relationship with ICS. We have a motion by Doug and we have a second by Bill. Further questions, comments? Seeing none, assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Arnold. Let's move on to item E, which is policy review, pages 81 through 89. Dr. Schab.
Yes, before we start, I think I want to move to pull BCBA, public participation at board meetings, partly because there's been some comments about the second paragraph regarding the public participation and what that means, and I think we should do a little wordsmithing, and I don't think we should do it at the board table. So it would be, it's page 85 of the school board packet for the city board. Second paragraph, I just think that there's been some questions about that, and
Okay, so the motion is to refer BCBA back to the policy review committee. Do we have a second for that motion? Second by Jackie. Assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Go ahead, Dr. Schab.
okay, so let's take operation of unmanned aircraft systems. I'd move approval of ACDC. We'll just do these one at a time. I think it'll be.
Okay, we have, you don't want to do them in total?
We can.
It's
Let's
the second.
do them in
It's the
total.
second reading, so.
Let's do them in total. So BCAD, executive sessions, board meeting agenda and pre-meeting preparation, and the school board evaluation. I'd move approval of those four.
We have a second by Doug. Questions or comments about any of the second readings of those other policies?
I'm just disappointed that no one asked Ms. Schab if she was thunderstruck.
Any other comments?
Fine. I'm used to being made fun of about this policy review stuff.
If I may, Mr. President?
Yeah.
AC/DC was a band.
Do that.
Wait till we get ABBA, and then you can go into it again, okay? Remember, the B is backwards, so.
We may have to send up an SOS.
Okay. Assuming a roll call vote, all in favor, say aye by singing. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. AC/DC motion carries. And then,
So the next is then,
I don't think we can pull those because we aren't finished
Oh,
with
yeah.
BCBA, so Cindy, am I correct? We shouldn't rescind those yet? Okay. So Dr. Schab, your work is done. Thank you. Let's move on to item F, which is general fund financial statement, electronic pages 94 through 103. Mr. Bree.
Mr. President, I was wondering if I could request to have, next time when I'm doing the financial statements, to have the song Thunderstruck going in the background while I talk about the financial statements. That might be overreach, I guess. But We are, as you mentioned, on page 94. Financial statements we're looking at are through October 31st, the first 4 months of the fiscal year. General fund revenues for the 4 months, just under $29 million. Expenditures at $25.576 million, resulting in an excess of revenues over expenses of a little over $3.4 million. Looking at the next page is comparing the annual budget to the 4 months actual. Both on the revenue side, we're at a little over 25% of revenues received compared to budget. Expenses about 22.5% of budget. Clicking forward to page, if you wouldn't mind going to my PDF here isn't cooperating. If you'd flip forward to page 98, and that's a look at the year-over-year comparison for the first 4 months. And I've included several comments here as to some of the variances. On the revenues, a lot of that timing difference is just the timing of the receipt of property taxes. So we're a little behind last year, but that's really a timing difference on receipt. Looking at state source revenue, number 2, the state per pupil payment is estimated through October, and then starting with November payments, the state adjusts based on actual student counts, et cetera. So, looking at October, we're behind last year's revenue, and last year the state had overestimated, the payment stream. Looking ahead to November, we're going to show per pupil revenue about $575,000 year to date above last year. So we'll see a flip in that next month. Federal source revenue, a big chunk of that increase over last year is a $535,500 Homeland Security grant for security cameras. So that was a wonderful grant. The expenditures related to those security cameras are included in the equipment and furniture line under expenditures. Other items to note on 2 pages down under expenditures, student transportation costs. There's a timing difference. We're still working with the city area transit and working towards a contract with Dietrich. And so with a timing difference there, in early November, there was a payment of about $236,000 for transportation, which would put us somewhat in line with last year. As things are moving on, I would anticipate a decrease in costs overall with the transportation costs we're seeing with the city area transit. The rent expense, down a few line items. Number 5, that gap is about $100,000 increase over last year. That's due to a timing difference on a payment to Grand Forks Park District for facility usage. Last year it was paid in November. This year paid previous to that. So that's just the timing difference where we're not seeing rent increases, significant rent increases. And under the expenditures, construction expenditures includes that $2.16 million includes about $1.9 million related to ESSER. So we're trying to be very judicious in our facility expenditures this fiscal year, and the majority of that would relate to ESSER dollars. So so a point in time here, again, I guess flipping you back to page 98. Revenues exceed expenditures through October of $3.423 million. Graphically, looking at revenues and expenses compared to budget, are on pages 101, 102, and then 103 is to look at the general fund balance at each point in time over the last 3 years. I'd certainly open it up to any questions that anybody may have.
Questions for Mr. Berge? Go ahead, Cynthia.
How does what the district pays the city for busing compared to what the district pays Dietrich?
A good question. It's a completely different dynamic from with the city right now. We're the city of Grand Forks is actually providing some drivers to drive Dietrich buses in some instances. So in that case, we're paying, you know, their salaries and benefit rate. From a ridership perspective on city area transit buses, it's 75 cents, you know, per ride.
So let me ask you to clarify. So when the city is providing the bus driver to Dietrich, we're paying Dietrich for the...
We're paying, we're working through that, but in effect, we would be paying Dietrich for the, you know, the use of the vehicle and working out the, you know, would anticipate that Dietrich would pay the city the driver rates. But we're still kind of working through that piece of it yet.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? If not, the recommendation is to approve the financial statement as outlined.
I'll make that motion.
We have a motion by Dr. Shab. Do we have a second? Second by Bill. Any further final questions or comments? Seeing none, assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. Let's move on to item 8, which is announcements. 8A is announcements. I have one announcement. Just as a reminder, our next meeting is on December 13th, I believe. It's starting at 5:30, and we start with the work session. We do the work session first, and then when we're all tired, then we do the regular meeting after that. Do we have any other announcements? Dr. Lewis, Ms. Golhatch, do you have any? Dr. Brenner?
I just have one, and it's a follow-up to the Career Impact Academy. I'd just like to acknowledge everybody sitting around the table tonight, both District 140 board members and City District 1 board members. Tonight's a historic evening for not only the school district, but for the city of Grand Forks. I think what you approved and what's going to move forward is going to be just fantastic for all interagencies to work together, and to some previous comments already about how we can better collaborate as government entities as we move forward. So I just want to thank all of you and applaud all of you for your thoughtful consideration and your action.
Mr. Olson, do you have any announcements from the Education Association? No. Okay, thank you. Future requests from board members? Okay. Board norms, how did we do, Amber?
I think we did well, and as the youngest person around the table to make an 80s rock band reference, I'm pretty proud of myself.
And for a man who actually grew up with AC/DC, I didn't know what the hell you were talking about. So well, thank you all. I especially thank the base board for being here, and have a great Thanksgiving and a good evening, and careful travels back home. We are adjourned.